You might want to tweet it for the.
It's the top link.
It's the top link. And we're back. Welcome to the day 2 start of MIT Media Lab's new computational law course. And we'll be exploring computational contracts today from a I'd say like a systemic perspective, referencing a use case in energy systems domain. But first, our collaborator, Brian Ulisny from Thomson Reuters Labs is doing a quick download, a tool that we might want to be using that we certainly want to know about for this. And let's jump right into that. So, hey, Brian, you want to say hi?
Oh.
There he is. All right. So I'm going to go right to screen share and see if I can catch up. And many of us here in the room, and I think increasingly online, are doing this on our phones. Okay, present to everyone. Here we go. Okay, so the first thing we do is we go to block1, blockone.thomsonreuters.com.
No P.
With no P. It's not Thompson. No. Thomson Reuters.com, and then we go on the right in the pretty orange to block 1 ID and click view more, and then we click launch demo, and then we click, then what do we do?
Then we post the color.
Yeah, so pick a color. You don't have to.
Oh, sorry.
Red. And that's put on mode.
Trump.
This will just trigger the wall creation.
Okay. I have to say that is a most delightful hue of orange.
We like it. We slap it on everything.
That tells me, like, soon I can understand at least a lot through the lens of key sites and things like that, which is good. Okay, it's loading. And so what is loading now?
This Stronghold app, which is a wallet.
All right, and so, all right, we've got a variety of logins. I think I will choose my Google one. So now here we're in a survey. So I now have an externally issued credential from Google that's logged me in. And now what am I seeing and what are we doing?
So choose a wallet. So it's going to set up your wallet essentially.
Okay, darn it. Okay, this is just a throwaway, I guess. All right, I agree to the term. And can you give us a rundown of the terms and conditions? Just kidding.
Yeah, I don't think your password's strong enough.
Oh God. All right, fine.
Come on, man.
I know.
You did that purely for illustrative purposes.
Clearly, yeah. I just want to let you know this is appropriate level of security with Thomson Reuters. All right. Now, are we happy? Is it still not happy?
Still not happy.
If we're not going to do Google, what would we find Google isn't working?
Yeah.
Which one should select?
It might
Might
be
be your
it
phone.
might be that it's
My
doing
phone's
this on the
ancient.
phone.
Yeah.
My phone is crazy. I think it's
Yeah,
like
it
a
works.
mobile
I mean, it
interface.
works on
Yeah.
the phone. I signed in with Google. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he did Google on a laptop.
Yours is working.
Yeah, it's working.
We even answered it.
Right, so it's another thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so you need to save all of these words in order.
Save them?
Yeah. So much better.
Okay, so this is interesting, actually. So we'll want to speak to this, or maybe we'll come back to this. But this is critical for if Christian Smith was here or some of the other people. If this was a class on identity more than contracts, we'd be all about this. So I'm going to call this factors of authentication for basically like credential, like re-access or re-key. So like, you know, I don't know, like I lost my stuff on the out in the town on the battlefield, and now but I have to prove I'm me to get a re-key, or like my, you know, like all copies of my private key would crush. The code book is blazing. What do I do? How do I prove I'm me? So this is a very good way to do it in I'm going to call this modern cryptography out in commerce and among crypto meanies. But they have this, and there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it, but they generate these sets of words, which I'm told, are which are very, very high grade of authentication. It's very hard to guess what the sequence of words are, although the words are human readable. So like the words appear in a dictionary, but a dictionary attack is very unlikely to achieve the set of words. So, and some people are now starting to experiment with poetry and things with meter and rhyme to make it easier for the person to be able to remember it if they're not trained, mnemonically to do that, as many are. During stress, you might not be able to do it. And so, so this is very key. I, however, am not going to write these down.
Well,
What? I should just copy and paste them somewhere. Okay.
All words. It's very exciting.
Well, there's
Concentration and power too. So you get to a certain point where it's going to become much more difficult to factor, and then after that, it's just a waste of
Sorry.
is the smallest number that's
It was like
square of a prime.
yeah, what is it? It's 4,000 as you said.
Those are the best Facebook things.
Yeah, it's just 2 to 12. Sorry.
You're the crypto.
The respectful one.
All right, here we go. Next on a very attractive palette of orange. Okay, and now we do
How's your memory?
pretty good. I think it was that. No, but it has the numbers in it. Okay, I just have to do one word?
Yeah,
Okay, I think,
where it says, please enter one of your recovered words.
Oh, you have to make sure you write this down.
you're watching this? So this is interesting. So actually we're getting a little bit of nice authentication tutorial, at least the Thomson Reuters way. You have a pretty good team in England that went through this and came up with this, as I recall.
Yeah.
A good team. Okay, so now what are we doing? Now, what are we seeing here? What does this mean? With this, are we getting into cryptocurrency now, Brian?
Yes, I believe you are, sir.
Oh my goodness. Let's check it out. So, ETH, did I say ETH? Okay, well anyway, this is an ETH, right? ETH. So this is a tiny, like, shaving of ether. Why do we need that? In order to process a transaction, we need some gas, is what they call it. Okay, so if I click go, I don't have sufficient funds.
Yeah, that's okay. So open your vault.
Okay, open my vault. Okay, right. I mean, oh, good. I feel secure.
So this would, yeah, your password not one of your 12 words.
Mhm.
Okay, now what you should do is under there's a up here, it says Rate B network. I would go to the Thomson Reuters Morse board network. That's a test.
Testnet.
Yeah.
Testnet is the lingo within Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other blockchain, basically technologies for where you do everything, but we're not actually charging money and it's not production yet. But you can go a long way on testnets when they're designed well.
Okay, so now go and click on the 3 dots.
Okay.
Okay, and say get ether.
Get ether. So now we're getting some of the so-called currency or crypto coins that we use to power transactions on this network. This network is for identity, but it's still a transaction on the network. Now what?
And say get ether from faucet.
Why do you call it a faucet?
Like jumps free.
Cool, can you keep reading it?
Did I do it?
Yeah.
Okay, do I close?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
I've got one. Okay, I'm a lucky winner. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, Thomson Reuters. Now what do? I go back to my place and do my thing?
no, I suppose you could try to transfer money to one another.
What,
I'll take your one.
I wanted to, okay, so let's say we want to transfer, who's going to transfer, who else, who's ready to receive money? Okay, all right, so how do can you talk us through, how do we conduct this transaction?
That's a great question. So,
Sorry, Brian, thank you. You're a good sport, man.
hey, we're all learning here. So go to the 3 dots again.
Okay, this is why he's in charge of the lab. Like on the fly, he remembers this stuff. Okay, one.
Transfer ether.
Yep, I know this is, yep, now what?
Okay, so then so something small, yeah. So you need to add another account here. So
The payee.
yeah.
Okay, so now we need to know your address, I think, which is going to be what, like a hexadecimal string, probably.
Whatever shows up is shown as the user word or the user ID.
Yeah. So in your wallet here, it'll be whatever this thing is here. So I think
Hey!
we would get it from wallet.
Whoa! Look at this, Brian. What does this look like? This looks like an identicon. I'll bet. So let's check out yours and see if you have a slightly different block. This may be a uniquely, on GitHub, how they auto-generate like little blocks. I think this is an identicon. I think this is one of the hacks that me and Brian came up with for Providence. That we can stamp on things.
Okay. It's all coming together.
It's all coming together.
My identical, more transformer-like.
It's just way better. I'll own that. So Brian, check this out. Sorry, like this is proper identicon algorithm. Except for it's got a subset of the blocks, so I guess they weren't expecting much company in their network. Like this is exactly the technology we want to play with, that we can stamp on things like at port of entry to show that the ship of carriage is on the authorized list or whatever. I think we can do that. I think it can be computationally, provably, in real time, authenticated, so we can verify that things are going correctly according to the law. Okay, what do we do now, Brian?
So we need to get his address.
Okay, what is your address, sir?
Where would it be on the string?
So you're probably wondering out there in internet land, what on earth is going on here right now? Let me bring you in. What's going on now is we're attempting to do a transfer of ether from one account to another on block 1 using the Thomson Reuters overlay.
You could, since that's just an address, right? No one can do anything to it. It's like your home address. You could just type it into Telegram.
I'm not in Telegram.
I mean, oh, you can.
Yeah.
You can write on the board. You could come over here and type it on my computer.
Over here, so you can just type it in.
Yeah. Yeah, why don't you, if you just read it to me,
Can you scan the QR?
I'll type it.
It's a long string.
Yeah, I figured it would be a long string. Could you, I hate to ask this, but could you please read it to me so I can just type it? Thanks. And I type it here. Okay, I'm ready.
Second.
And I'll
Someone should see if they can transfer with Amanda Brown.
Okay, 0, small, lowercase x, 3, lowercase a, 0, 6, 8, b, these are all lowercase letters. Good. 5, 3, 8, 6, 3, 8, 3, 1, 0, 6, bf, 6, c, 6, 0, 4, 2, d, 1, 2, 5, ed, 5, 5, 5, 8.
Okay, I'm gonna read back.
Okay, so how long will we see in the movie someone,
Good thing Chris's hotel is in New Hampshire. 0x3a 068b 5e 38
Yeah, I'm excited.
6383 df 6c 60. Ran out of space. 42 d125 ed 555a.
Exactly.
Okay, launch sequence verified. Now what do we do?
Okay.
Okay. I feel I should give him a little bit more because I made him come all the way over here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get boosted up a little bit. That's your bonus. Thank you. Okay, now what?
I would not do transfer all.
Okay, oh, good call. I see
But you
the
need
boxes
but
I
you
want to
need a
click on.
non-zero-
Why?
okay, transaction. So that's just the fee, so you do need to transfer something. Why don't you,
Right now.
is it clickable on the?
Gemma?
I know.
Yes. Yeah, sure, absolutely, yes.
Maybe she'll be
You can
here.
say, I'll do it as soon as Chris starts talking. Could you repeat the next instruction?
Is there a way to change the transfer amount? Oh, yes.
Oh, here?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so you don't want to transfer more than one. Can you do like 0.
Oh, duh.
So you'll have nothing. Okay,
Shoot, 0.31, a little more than 3. Okay,
okay.
wait, actually. Oh, and then there's a little, what, you guys taking a cut?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know, you gotta pay
So,
your minors. Okay, so
Andrews get.
now do I hit next?
Yeah.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Okay.
What happens?
Now what?
Transfer funds.
I'm doing it. Invalid address. Wait, so do you have to confirm your address or validate it on the network in some way? Is you get an email or does a thing happen?
No, it doesn't say, yeah. It doesn't do that.
I mean, the namespace is so big, it's just like.
Sure you got it right?
We confirmed
Yeah.
it. Should we reconfirm it? Confirm it? Yeah, could you copy it and could you copy and email it then?
Yeah.
Yeah. That might be the best way.
Or
Or what?
That's a good question.
did the transfer work to the woman at Microsoft?
Yeah, I'm working on that.
too? Okay, I was also.
It's executing right now.
On Telegram? It's-
No, I copied her address from Telegram.
Okay, good. So through Telegram.
Yeah.
This is very good.
And I've got screenshots of the step-by-step process all up in public too.
Could you please send it to dasa@civics.com? Hi, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll grab it over here.
I think I transferred it to you.
So it is.
It's through
Thank
email,
you.
it's it's constant.
How long does it usually take?
Data point.
Yeah.
The first
It
time.
looked like you must have the same.
It is a
DAs.
you can use their Oracle.
Amanda's gonna be rich in the
She may or may not send it back to
Did yours go through?
Did yours go through?
I think so.
It apparently did.
That's it. Let us know she received it.
All right, thank you. Awesome. Okay,
Yeah, Brian seems to be charging,
all right.
so I do think it does take a lot of.
HackMD. Whoa,
Ben, you're my oral Yeah.
HackMD. This is our shared notes for the class. Okay. Live stream, and this is let's put the address in. Okay, now go over here. Go get the address. Okay, you're watching, right?
Yeah.
So nothing can possibly go wrong. Read it. Now I go over here, and I go, oh, no, I go over here, and I go, what, cancel?
So, yes, I do cancel.
Seems to be my only play. Now I do transfer. Now I do
Yeah, plus other account.
plus other account, and now I go paste.
Oh,
But
Using.
no.
well,
Oh, Amanda got it. Did you see it?
Block one.
okay.
Yeah, so what's that?
And then I go
Did you get it?
Yeah. She did.
0.23.
Yeah, I don't get permission.
And I do next. Okay, perfect. So we took advantage of the time to learn how to do a block one Ethernet address and transfer some money. We're doing a second try. Processing. Processing. Okay. Are you all right?
I think a little bit of flash, but it's not.
A little bit of a what?
Flash, it is.
Oh, be
There's a
careful.
backing up, and the rear end is someone who's coming into your way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So things are about to get a lot better.
Okay.
When I get your application thing in, do you have your application stuff done?
Yeah, I just need to do the video. I was just gonna talk out there from in here, and I could just say hi to you.
That'll be fine. TMA is doing a quick video, which is like say hi to your class and to the admissions committee so they can get to know you better. And then my thought is, it's up to you, of course, but my thought is that what we should all do is at the end of our video, we should say like, go away, TMA, something like that. And so it ends in a bang. And then she would say like that she could take credit for being one of the TAs in the class at the Media Lab, just known to be the coolest part of MIT. So that's what I think.
Agreed.
I think, okay, agreed. There'll be two of us clapping at least.
So when I come in here, just say that I'm gonna do the video outside, so it's like more quiet and I can be walking and interactive. That's coming here and just like.
Yay!
Awesome, okay.
Okay, great.
See
So,
you guys.
okay, prep us when you're starting to do it, so we know to do it.
In like literally 2 minutes.
Okay.
And just go out there and then, does that work? Or
Yeah, it works. Maybe just do a bang bang on the door so that we can.
Or you can send a message.
No, just do a bang bang on the door. Yeah, okay, that's good. All right, go do it. All right.
Get done as soon as possible.
Is this normal? TMA, real career. She's one of the TAs for the class.
Oh,
Is this normal, Brian? Is this what, Brian, Wilson, is this what happened with you? Is it just like the endless
Yeah,
tumble of churn?
it's, yeah. So I can see from Amanda's that, my little Identicon
Yep.
shows that it's sent at 10:51 and 35 seconds.
Did you receive
And
any?
I actually got 2 transactions. The initial one, I actually got something.
Oh.
Yeah, although it showed that it
Brian.
failed.
It shows it failed?
Oh,
No, I mean,
yeah.
so on your screen, it showed it failed.
It
right?
did.
That's why we tried
So
it. But
yeah,
I got 2
If you
transactions.
click outside of the window, it goes away.
Okay.
And you still have one, look at
Do I still have one? What if I hit like refresh? I should have like 20. Anyway, so I think what we've shown here is that how to create an, actually, let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. What we've shown is how to create a wallet on the Ethereum network through Thomson Reuters Block 1 application. And we actually conducted how many transactions? 1 between us,
2 to Amanda.
2 with Amanda, and that's between, so we conducted,
Brian, you will not do
so 3 altogether. So 3 successful transactions, lickety split. So good luck. I'm kind of getting like set up on Ariba or and like an SAP and like the Swift network to do the interaction. So there's something quick about this, and it's extremely auditable. One of the things we should show during the break is we should crack open the Ethereum blockchain and actually show these transactions, and then let's like actually forensically deconstruct a block or 2 for good time's sake, and then like look at and then like match the hashes up. Oh yeah. So
That's etherscan.io.
yeah, we'll use that as the
The cat demand must be low.
yeah, no
The
kidding.
cat demand is really.
Yes, the cat demand. So they don't know about that yet.
Slowing down the changes, the cat supply demand balance, the band's so heavy. Cats.
I know, the critters. Okay, everybody, so that was, I'm gonna just say, I think that luck is smiling upon our class today because we were able to achieve that special bonus round of tool acquisition and skill building, lickety split, and in exactly the container of time needed for Chris to get his notes.
Yeah.
So we're off to a great start. And now I want to just really welcome you to MIT. And we've been collaborating for a bit now on different client things, and especially enjoying geeking out on computational contracts and sharing notes on it. And I'm pretty sure I've been more or less like a pile of baking soda here, you know, you could say metaphorically, chemically, which has been somewhat inert, but holding the potential of computational contracts. Chris is vinegar. And so I think we're about to we have the opportunity to kind of put the right chemicals together and create a catalyst. And so we've been fixing to do this for a long time. We haven't done this as a typical curriculum. This is an innovation class or like a pop-up class. And so some of this is because Chris and I have been wanting to get together and geek out on computational contracts since we met, I'd say. And we thought, well, why not do it in the context of a project-oriented, roll-up-your-sleeves class with lawyers and technologists. And so with that, I have to say I'm giddy with anticipation to hear kind of like your presentation and how you look at it, and then to have you, when you're done talking with the conversation, roll us into what's going to be small groups that work on use cases.
Yep, no, I have an idea on what we're talking about.
Boy, so with that, could you maybe do a little introduction of yourself, and then bring us, and then tell us what computational contracts, especially the variety that are automated contract systems.
Sounds good. Oh, do I need to switch?
No, you're good. Okay, I'll be a camera person.
There we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Barron. I'm a partner in the Environment and Energy Group at Trinker, Biddle & Reith. We're one of the oldest law firms in the country, and a fairly unique one that has an emphasis on high technology. I think we were the first to have a chief data scientist at our law firm, and at a time when a lot of other law firms outsourced the that hard quantitative stuff that makes lawyers' heads hurt to other folks for e-discovery applications and so on. We were one of the firms that actually did a bunch of that in-house and developed our own big data analytics mining capabilities and so on, which is quite interesting to work with. I focus on regulatory and transactional work in the energy and the environmental market space. Market design is the majority of the regulatory work I do, mainly in the electricity markets, but also a ton in the environmental markets, carbon markets, renewable energy certificate markets, markets that, as Daz and I have talked of, are certificate of origin markets, essentially, attribute tracking markets, and so on. I started my career back when I was a munchkin, working with the green groups to do advocacy on Capitol Hill around things like clean energy and climate change. After college, I came back and worked for a former Senate caucus and a lot with the Senate EPW and Energy and Natural Resources Committee on market design around the first iterations of the four pollutant bills, and also around the design of the international carbon trading systems, Kyoto Protocol, clean development mechanism, things like that. After doing a stint in law school and doing some consulting while I was in law school, I hung up my own shingle and did a lot of work on market design, master contract design, mainly in the energy commodity space, but continue to do a bunch of sustainability work, environmental market work, and so on. I took advice of a good friend who said, if you want to be a good transactional lawyer, go be your client for a few years. And so I went into business and was a VP at Pace Global Energy Services, a company that we the team sold to Siemens a few years back. When I was there, I did large-scale development work on renewables, clean energy systems, and advised a lot of multinational companies that run very complex supply chains and have a whole diversity of assets. And I think the first time I was introduced to the type of arbitrage and merit order dynamics that I'll be talking about today was years ago when I started working and starting to bridge into the transactional work from the market design work, and it's been quite interesting. So I worked in business as an executive for a number of years, and then came back to the practice of law, joined Drinker Biddle to start a practice really focused on the rise of distribution level assets. So in the energy sector, that means think of generation assets that are located at the building level, behind the meter, at the campus level, and so on. And the overall transformation of our power system from one that's a hub and a spoke system, sending stuff pretty much one way down from the transmission system in large central station power plants, to one that's more of a cellular mesh that has the ability to be self-healing, to provide new market layers. I think you heard Michael talk yesterday about transactive energy, folks who are traditionally just being consumers of energy also becoming suppliers because they happen to have generation resources like solar systems, solar plus battery systems, or even more elaborate and robust systems like cogeneration CHP systems on their property. So I met Daza when he was recommended by Jason, and we teamed up on a client that was doing some interesting certificate of origin work, and we kind of hit it off from there. And he asked me to come in and talk a little bit about my impressions on applied distributed ledger technology, and in particular applied to process. I am not a cryptocurrency whiz at all. In fact, my experience with cryptocurrency was talking to my partners who are former heads of the SEC enforcement office and watching them go, ooh. And I think you heard, I think we saw a few weeks ago, and I sent Daza this, he can circulate it around, but the chair of the SEC, set out a statement about their view of ICOs, ITOs as, these are really investment contracts. My firm has long believed that you can certainly do these things. They can be great vehicles for capital raising to build, not only do capital raising, but community raising to a certain degree. But at the same time, they need to be registered offerings.
Jimmy! All right. Fantastic. Woo!
There we go.
Thank you. That's good. This will be slightly better world if that person's been through an MBA at slums. Okay. Excuse me.
No,
Thank
no
you,
worries.
Chris.
No, that's great. So it's funny because most of the counseling I've been doing around blockchain these days is talking to clients. The vast majority of the clients I engage with, the issue is, what's the underlying value proposition? What's the applied value proposition of a decentralized, immutable ledger? Have you thought through, why would someone work a node? Why would someone mine? What is the value of the token without a coin? What is, how do you look at the function that that's serving, and does it make sense to have a full decentralization? Do you want to go with something that's semi-distributed? And so if you hear talk about consortium-based or private blockchains, the majority of the work that I've been doing of late have been looking into those dynamics, really around how can you look at an enterprise, map multiple processes that it's doing, and then be able to look at where that centralized immutable ledger, that kind of spine for a bunch of processes, can be useful. So Daza knows that I've been kind of skeptical for some time because you really, in my world, I want to see a business value proposition, a process value proposition for why you're implementing this technology. It could be as ephemeral as kitties, crypto kitties. It's fascinating, and it's and it's amazing when you think about it that they, Ethereum, which is meant to run all of these, business-oriented, enterprise-oriented systems, gets slowed down dramatically because people are expecting pictures of cats to eventually have intrinsic value. But it just goes to show you, the internet was made for the cats, I guess. By the cats, for the cats, as some friends say. So you can kind of see where I come at this. I do a lot of structure work. A lot of my clients come to me and say, we want this, how do we get there? based on the underlying structure of electricity regulations and so on. And you got a taste of that yesterday when Michael said, we want to do this, but no one wants to be regulated like utility. That's way too expensive if you have to face that type of regulation. So that's an example of how working with clients to structure around the legal frameworks. And that often means changing ownership dynamics, service flow dynamics, and so on, but finding a way to achieve the goal that they're looking for. I think that kind of gives me a bit of an intro into starting to work the whiteboard and talking a little bit about some of the ways that we've been thinking about smart contracts and the dynamics around that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the state laws that have popped up recently around how they're looking at smart contracts and such. So if it's okay with you, Daz, I'll just start whiteboarding.
Do it.
And you guys can always ask me if I chicken scratch doesn't, So, do I need to set up this one?
Let's do it one more.
So, smart contracts, automated contract systems, interesting stuff. And certainly no one has nailed down any of this doctrinally in the definitive sense. It is still has a lot of open issues. And so I'm going to be probably asking more questions than I'm going to be giving answers here because that's kind of where we're at. I think the prime question about smart contracts is the line between, what is software as the contract. And I'm going to use a little legal term for folks, the lawyers, it'll make sense. I'm going to use K. K equals contract. That's just, if you go to law school, you learn that, for your first year. K means contract. So the question is the software itself the contract? Or, as I would argue, is the contract using software / a program? And what's interesting is you talk to a lot of people and they will say this is really up in the air. It has yet to be determined. What I will say is this latter prong of it here, that smart contracts can be viewed as contracts using software as a program to execute, as a mechanism to fulfill the obligations to perform under a contract, is something that we've had in place for a long, long time. And I'm going to give you guys some examples. But regardless of how you look at them, let's say you are looking at the software as the contract itself. To have a contract legally, you still need a writing, and this goes all the way back to common law and the statute of frauds, which is pretty simple. I mean, if I go up to you and I say, over beers, we're going to agree to both invest, $75,000 in this enterprise, I come back to you the next day or like a few days later and say, hey, we agreed that you were going to be putting in $75,000. Where is it? My response is oh, that didn't bind me, and that's not enforceable. And this goes all the way back to old common law from England, where you had something called the statute of frauds, which stood simply to say that if it's an important legal document, important legal arrangement between two parties, you write the thing down. Well, today, writings can be electronic, and electronic records are obviously prolific. So what is, and I'll note here, an electronic record, from a legal perspective, equals a writing in the vast majority of instances. If we had done that same deal and we had just exchanged some emails with a decent amount of contractors, or if you had a contract with someone and the contract said the parties can agree through electronic exchange on amending the contract, and I send you an email that says, do you agree to this amendment? And you write me back an email and say, yes, that's fine in the vast majority of jurisdictions. So the electronic form does not cease to make it a writing from a legal perspective in most instances. Now, what is a writing? What is a record? If you look at ISO the ISO standard, which is really the international standard 15489. The ISO standard here is that a record is evidence of an asset by an organization or purpose, or it's in pursuit of a legal obligation, a business transaction, or so on. I mean, it is a type of record. And so electronic writings, and so on can be records. And the real question is does the information contained in an electronic record match up with what that jurisdiction's requirements are to form a contract? Is there consideration? Are both parties obligated to do something? Has there been a bargain that's been struck, an exchange of value? Those types of dynamics. So what's really interesting is where this is emerging on the next level with blockchains and so on. These people are asking questions: can you use a blockchain to notarize? So in other words, the process that used to be you got together in person. So when the person, the notary, who's has a legal authorization to be a notary, including a special stamp that they're given and a special record book that they have to keep. When that person notarizes, they're physically stamping and so on. And what you're seeing now is a number of states and other jurisdictions coming out and saying that if all the conditions are appropriate, you can use blockchains, cryptographic technologies, and so on to undertake notarization because it has that same assurance of recordation and so on. That's emerging. What's interesting from that question is what type of, an email is clear. If I send you an email and I say yes to something, one can argue that can constitute acting as a signature. If something is cryptographically signed, one has to wonder what's the ID, proof, and verification authentication around who actually wielded the key to get in. And that's a dynamic that we're going to talk about a bit here, which is when you go to fully atomized, decentralized blockchains, you often run the risk of single key, single point authentication. And if you lose that password, if you lose your key, or someone else gets a hold of it, it can be a big problem. And you might have read about this in the press. If people are kind of saying, do I go with a Ripple gateway? Do I keep with the Swift network or something like that? Well, one of the risks that you have with Ripple and others is that if someone loses their main key that they get when they set up the gateway, you can have an institution basically lose billions of dollars in a few minutes. And it's, to a degree, irreversible. And that question about what type of protections do folks really want in commerce and transactions and deals around irreversibility, ID, authentication, firewalls around certain types of information, and so on, those are always kind of at play here. Because again, a lot of the clients that I work with are looking at DTL as a way to improve and integrate a whole bunch of processes that have overlapping inputs and outputs. And with that, it is one where you really have to ask how decentralized, as I was joking with Daza, how libertarian and non-centralized you really want to make it. And there are certain applications where, make it really libertarian, that completely decentralized, what you're offering. But there's a lot of dynamics where the ability to go back and error correct, the ability to, outside the realm of coins, have your folks who are working your nodes and your mining get paid on a by service basis. Outside of having a cryptocurrency, operating. And again, there's you can have things like with Ripple where the cryptocurrency is a bridge transactionally in and out. But the real question is how does that perform better than cash does? Some folks would argue that various systems out there just need to get to be more comfortable with getting rid of collateral and holding accounts, to deal with the currency risk on the transaction on both sides. We've had for years networks where they don't force one party into taking currency risk, where you have a deal where as soon as the the transfer closes, it goes into the common currency, which is the dollar, and it comes out of the dollar to the local currency on the receiving end, and it happens within a shorter time period, and folks can contract around that currency risk. Having a cryptocurrency as the common currency bridge, one has to ask, beyond the ease of the transfer on blockchain, what more does that get you beyond using dollars and other dynamics? So part of where a lot of this is going around smart contracts and automated contract systems, in my views, comes down to really how much do you need? How much you need with automated contracts. So let's look at the Arizona smart contract law, which has some interesting dynamics. So the Arizona smart contract law that's been put in place now basically has a few components. Excuse me, I think it's being considered. I'm not sure it's actually passed. It talks about an event-driven program when defining a smart contract. It talks about using distributed ledger technology. And then what I find most interesting, it talks about that technology can take custody and do instrument transfer. What's interesting is that you take this out and you already have this operating on multiple levels in the commodities market for some time through basically the establishment of master agreements in contracts. Are folks familiar how the basic master agreement model works in legal contracts?
Can you see it partly because we're joined by, you're going to love this, one of the core developers for Blockly Scratch.
Oh,
Scratch Blockly rather, and some other folks who don't have a legal background, and so it would be helpful, and also just for posterity, if you could just do a quick squib.
Oh, sure. I encountered Scratch because my 8-year-old's second graders are in a computer immersion course in their school in Loudoun County, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. They're on track to doing JavaScript before they're out of elementary school, and what I thought was so cool about Scratch and Blockly and so on is the ability to create a visualization so that non-quantitative, qualitative focused people like me, in particular business executives, division heads, senior vice presidents, who know the business process that they're overseeing. But if you ask them, would you like to get together and work on mapping how distributed ledger technology might assist your business, they would say, oh, wow, I'm not qualified to do that. Still. But if you take Blockly and we basically turn each of those blocks and shapes, keep the Boolean logic around process, but basically adopt business terminology so that we map a set of blocks to what someone who is in manufacturing would need for their business, what someone in the service sector would need for their business, what a media company would need for their business. We could use a dynamic like that to basically get all the division heads to map using the same tool, but then because the commonality on the block interface, we could do the horizontal linkages throughout all the processes and show them where a centralized ledger might assist. And I say centralized just in the sense that all the processes are using the distributed ledger technology in a centralized manner where the ledger itself might be distributed through a consortium or on a private basis, through approved select nodal operators and so on. But the overall value that I saw to it was just a brilliant way to visualize basic logic processes. And what I thought was so cool is that, I see my kids right now, because of their work with Scratch and so on, being able to do the logic games that I had to take on the LSAT and was like, oh man, how do I handle this thing? And like they're already like, oh well, Dad, here's the thing, I'm given a rule set, and so it was really a pleasure, watching them get into that. And my impression was, wow, if kids can do it, business executives can do it, and that it could hold promise as a strategic planning.
And I love playing with blocks. So, but encapsulate complexity into a module that can be interoperable and slotted into a sequence. This is the only way we're ever going to make it intact to the almost infinite feeling complexity of the digital age. So there's something core here in making it so that, like elementary school kids can do it. All kinds of sense for computing. When we compute the law, we should expect nothing less.
You'd be shocked that it's usually the IT departments, and maybe in a very aware organization, the CEO's office, who, if they've done any examination of it, have a sense of how processes overlap from a resource and a operational level in their company. It's more common to find the division siloed off and running completely separate systems, different vendors, and they argue that there's a lot of redundancy there, but again, some of the dynamics of distributed ledger technology can deal with those issues. So I thought it was the coolest damn program. My kids' mazes are really.
All right, sir, as you were.
Okay, so back to some state laws that are under development, looking at what's going on here. And what was, again, interesting here is that if you take out the distributed ledger technology, these dynamics were in place for some time. And the way that we've seen them in place has been under, in many cases, master agreement structures, where, let's say I want to sell you widgets, or pick something more fun than widgets and stuff. What are we selling, Basil?
We're going to be selling a variety of crypto critters today, which are actually puppies.
Okay, which are actually puppies. Well, with doggy coin, right? Okay. So we have a master agreement for large-eyed animal pictures.
Oh.
I know the CryptoKitty community would be like, you called them gifts. Way more solid than that, but yeah, that's pictures. So what we would do with a master agreement between Daza and I is we would say, okay, I know that Daza wants to buy crypto puppies from me for the foreseeable future, and probably next 5 years at least. So what we do is we say, okay, well, we're going to put in place a contract that will define the overall relationship between me as seller of the crypto puppies and him as buyer of the crypto puppies. We would memorialize this agreement in a master agreement, which are often made what's called evergreen, which means they keep going and going and going until someone kills it. Someone decides to terminate it. So you put the master agreement in place, and what happens is we would agree under the master agreement to when we undertake trades. The master agreement might say that either of us can initiate a trade. It might also say that every year Daza has to buy at least 100 crypto puppies, have a volume minimum to it. He would be in breach if he doesn't buy that much crypto puppies. But maybe it says that, my crypto puppy manufacturing is really good. I'm confident that I can produce a lot of puppies. So I'll guarantee him that he has to buy 100 crypto puppies, but if he wants to buy 1,000 crypto puppies every year, I'll sell him 1,000 crypto puppies every year. And you can have other dynamics in these contracts around selling stuff or services that make them contingent. In other words, if I only have 120 crypto puppies, Daza can't say you're in default if I have a contingent provision in there for only selling him 120 crypto puppies as opposed to the 1,000. So there's ways that you can vary the relationship. Now what happens is with these master agreements, you put them in place and you often put in the schedules of them something that's called confirmation, which is a letter agreement that relates to and is governed by the master agreement, although in some instances, and this is where deals often get tricky. Some people will sneak in that the confirm can govern the master, and they try to. I'm sure DLAs run into this at times where they try to redo and renegotiate the terms of the master through the confirm. But vast majority of the times, the confirm is governed by the master agreement that sets its terms, and so a trade triggers, Daza contacts me per the notice provision under this and says, I want to buy 5 crypto puppies next month. And we execute the confirm that we've already agreed the form of, and it fill in the 5, when is it getting delivered, how much is he paying me for them if we haven't already set price. Master agreements sometimes have price schedules. Other times they have price schedules where it's market marked. And we're going to talk about market marks in a few minutes, where it says, I will sell you the crypto puppy for a 5% discount from the Coinbase list price for crypto puppies. So the bottom line is that the confirmation is how it executes. What's interesting is that confirmations have been electronic for a long time. And these deal dynamics and the way the confirmation gets done, agreed to, signed, and executed happens electronically and has happened electronically for a long time. A lot of times the confirmation actually executes then through another agreement. And you have other agreements that serve as basically mechanism agreements. And I'll give you an example one. The ISDA, International Standards and Derivatives Association agreement, can be used for commodities trading that are both physically settled or derivatives trading that are financially settled. But it's an example of an agreement that basically provides the mechanism under these two. So I would have the master agreement. I'd have in one schedule a form of confirmation, and in another schedule I'd have the form of the ISDA, which is in itself a master agreement, and we just tailor what the credit schedules of it look like. And so on. And sometimes people put in tweaks to amend certain sections of the master. But this process of setting up a framework, contractual framework, but then having confirmations run is the underlying way that we've seen, what I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes, around automated contract systems operate that give you, that check these 2 boxes for the most part, at least this one. It might not check this one. This one is often occurring through the mechanism contract, which will specify either an over-the-counter deal, so a bilateral exchange, or it'll specify an exchange trade, where you're trading a contract on an exchange as a way to consummate the deal, trying to deal. So what's interesting, I found, is the term smart. We've had these types of systems in place for a long time, and I'm going to draw up one in a second. They relate, when I hear about smart contracts, they relate to it. What's interesting about smart contracts is where people talk about it being the software as the contract. Yes, you can have that. It can be a writing. It can form a contract. But what's fascinating is taking it to the point where they say the algorithms in the program itself can begin to pick up for the subjective analytics, for the assertion of what the intent of the parties was, and so on. Folks are working on algorithms to try to do that. But in a lot of instances, there's quite a bit of data that goes into making those calls, and there's a lot of legal judgment that goes in. And what's fascinating is if you look at how smart contracts have been really introduced lately as really investment vehicles, like the distributed autonomous organization. Sounds awfully cool, but even the most diehard, blockchain fans eventually wanted real people arguing over what the intent was. And it also showed a dynamic where even if the goal is to have a completely self-executing process, there's times where people want to step back and say, wait a minute, look what the outcome was. Some reversibility to this, being able to catch errors, being able to track proceeds. And what I'll point out, dynamics that you're used to in the banking system. So going forward, part of the balance here for smart contracts for investment is efficiency that saves you on all of the process, counting, legal fees and dynamics and so on, but also having enough interface with subjective judgment and so on until we hit singularity, and then I don't know. but until that point, you see that people want lawyers arguing over what was the intent, how does it work, and so on. So it's it is interesting stuff. Are smart contracts contracts? It's still an open question. You know, is a contract that's purely software a contract? Well, if that software outputs the core legal terms that you need under common law to form a contract, pretty good case it is. Question is, did people sign up to that? Did their signature execute? Was the cryptographical key someone used to say, I agree to this investment, count as a sign of the signature? Would laws triggering notarization kick in? Could that serve as a notary? These are all the kind of open questions we have right now. But overall, you know, just being programmed doesn't obliterate its function as a contract. It's still a contract if it has the core elements that make up a contract. And why is this important? It's important because it's enforceable. If Daz and I just agreed to the crypto puppy sale verbally, and Daza comes to me and says, you know what, end of the year, I was guaranteed 1,000 crypto puppies this year under our contract. And I'm like, go pound sand. I love those crypto puppies. I'm breeding them myself. You know, those puppies are more valuable than you could ever imagine. Daza where does Daza go to say, well, Chris said he'd do this. He promised, I counted on it. I relied on Chris's, you know, promise that he would perform, that we had this bargain. Well, that's where you have to have, you know, the writing, having the contract stand up on its own two legs electronically as a writing is very important for its enforceability. And again, enforceability is a dynamic that comes to play when you have to ask, is fully decentralizing, fully atomizing something across a, you know, hundreds of thousands of point distributed ledger, you know, with hundreds of thousands of nodes. What does that mean for the enforceability of obligations that are kind of flowing through it? And folks would argue, well, that's where you now have these service providers who sit out, you know, kind of sit ancillary to the chains that, if they need to, will write in another block to correct or balance or net out a transaction that went bad. And you are seeing some people who are looking to do this stuff, providing those provisions where they don't require a correction of the record, but they require a subsequent block added to net the error that was in the transaction sequence that came up and then was viewed. I'm an energy attorney, and so what really bugs me about what's going on right now with blockchain, with de-blockchain, is the amount of energy it's using.
By the way, I'm sorry, but I'm supposed to say we banned the blockchain.
Okay.
So just like say a blockchain, blockchain technology, Bitcoin blockchain,
Bitcoin blockchain.
Because like
yeah, no, it's not.
You got it.
Yeah. So the Bitcoin's blockchain, you know, and I think some of the examples, I'm sure you guys have heard these stats, but you know, Bitcoin 7 transactions a second. The Visa network 60,000 transactions in that same second. And then if you try to move blockchain the way it works today up to the transactional level of, like, say, just the Visa network, one of the international global credit card networks, it will require as much energy as the entire world uses right now. Which is why it's important to find ways to speed up and so on. I mean, look, proof of work and the complex math is fascinating and important to the process, but it takes a lot of transistors to fire, and a lot of, as our friend was pointing out earlier, a lot of tiny abacus's going back and forth.
right, a lot of electricity, a lot of churn, a lot of activity, a lot of what otherwise could be useful time and work.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And one could argue that that's essential for something that's fully distributed, fully decentralized, but at the same time, finding ways to make it so that all of the nodes don't have to crunch that much power when pushing the chain out is important. And you know, one of the things Daz and I were talking about is there are ways that you could, you know, create milestones, temporal point breaks in the chain, and take that Euro chain, segment it, compress it, you know, and do it in an encryption so that when it's decompressed, it can only get decompressed back to original form. And if the decompression errors, the other nodes will catch it. And it would require another decompression sequence, decompression sequence on the chain. But the reality is that right now, the sheer energy usage is substantial. And look, there's also other issues too with cryptocurrency. While I'm talking about cryptocurrencies, recent news reports pointing to all of the exchanges. I mean, more exchanges have lost their investors' money than the ones who have not lost their investors' money. They're also looking at trading dynamics because, again, these exchanges are not regulated. At least the older ones, some of the newer ones coming along are getting appropriate regulations in place, but some of the older ones simply weren't regulated. And so this type of market manipulation behavior that we're used to seeing in markets by regulatory authorities, and the two standard forms of that is horizontal market power and vertical market power being measured. There's absolutely no way that you can ascertain that. So I read just yesterday that potentially upwards of 600% of Bitcoin's price run up was due to one actor pumping and dumping.
Oh,
No, one actor. And if you look at traditional exchanges, commodity exchanges, and so on, you have all of these detailed rules against market manipulation to be a market maker on that exchange, which means that I have a standing bid and offer on that exchange. You have to satisfy a whole bunch of rules and other dynamics to make sure that you are not artificially influence the market. And in the brave new frontier of decentralized currency, it does give rise to the possibility that you can have actors that substantially manipulate the current digital currency markets, the cryptocurrency markets. So we just have to see how regulation basically works its way in. And I don't think they're going any, obviously the markets are here to stay, but I think it's safe to say that they're going to be substantially more regulated in the future than they are right now. At least such that normal, basic, fair dealing can occur between parties. And that's what market manipulation really addresses. It creates a more even playing field so that you can't have a few big dogs decide our bottom line is better if the price goes this way, and I'm just going to make that happen in the overall market.
So then how do you explain the Fed and the US dollar?
That's the central banking system and so on. Look, you can make a lot of arguments about the loop cycles that are created with quantitative easing and the rest of it, but central banks, post-Bretton Woods, have the general agreement that they're tied to countries' GDPs. They can control inflationary dynamics, and they provide, importantly in this country, links to things like the FDIC, which creates the security that anybody who puts their hard-earned money to something is not just going to lose it the next day when someone hacks it.
let me help you out here a little bit too, which is, so you can expect a lot of this questions from folks, and right across the way, you're about to meet some, I'll say Bitcoin maximalists at your request, and some other folks. So one way to look at that question is to say we're going to, what we're talking about, and especially where we're headed after the lecture when we break into teams, is looking at composition of systems. And so you would say that at the market layer, there's many ways to compose a system, and there's rules. So there are implied rules. They're not written down like the regulations and statutes for the market layer of Bitcoin and for Ethereum, but they're baked into the code, and they're understood and they're discussed. There are rules for markets for Beanie Baby, for commodities, let's say, and for stocks, for sure. And then for some supply chains, you can read something called the trading partner agreement that defines basically mini market rules within what can be billion-dollar supply chains of many players that can't fire each other but come together. And then in Federal Reserve, there are a set of rules. So there's a decision and there's a choice about where they put it on a spectrum of centralization versus and what the priorities were. And that may or may not be how you would compose a market for, say, an energy grid or for a supply chain. It probably wouldn't be, because that's really a currency market. But since we're talking about Bitcoin now, it's similar-ish to a currency market. So comparing it to the Federal Reserve makes a lot of sense. But I'd say what's most notable about the answer to the question is, we can actually ascertain in mini lawyer way, write down the assumptions and the actual rules and the mechanisms and the methods at the market layer and at the contract layer and down to the transaction layer, and begin to model, are we getting closer or further from the outcomes and the system dynamics that we seek? How delightful. Okay, bring it home. Or no, bring it home, keep going.
So, we had talked yesterday about a microgrid, and I figured I could use that as a scenario to map out some automated contract systems that I've helped set up and seen in testing. Well, first what I'll do is I'll show you a very basic diagram that shows kind of how they work. So, and we're going to relate it back to where Arizona, which is very common with many other states, are going in terms of what legally can be a binding enforceable agreement. So, what you have at the most simple thing is a bunch of assets. To start, you have a bunch of assets that can operate in different postures. And so when we talk about a microgrid, we can talk about a microgrid that's a multi-customer microgrid. One where it has cogeneration, gas-fired power plants, solar arrays, battery storage, thermal storage, things like that, controls on the buildings and so on. And we could, for the benefit of the folks here, we can make one of the customers base. And we can make maybe some of the other customers, some of the off-base housing, first responder centers, and things like that. But before we get into the details of how assets in a microgrid can assume different operational postures, the key thing to remember here is that you have a whole bunch of these assets that can work in different ways. And they will work in different ways based on signals that they get from the market. So each of these dots right here are market marks. This one could be the price of natural gas, the fire of the cogeneration plant in the microgrid the day before. This one could be the price of steel that the smelting plant that's located within this large microgrid can get when they run their arc furnaces and sell steel. This one could be the value of serving customers within the microgrid with power generated from the power plant, basically the value of the electricity market at a different time. This could be another dynamic here on the value of another form of production for manufacturing that comes out. But the bottom line here is all of these represent market indicators, market marks. And so each of these dots might be something like gas price above this threshold, power price above this threshold or below this threshold or something. So what these market marks do is they feed in what I'm drawing out here, which is an automated contract system that runs off a merit order algorithm. These all feed in here to what is a merit order algorithm. And what all that is basically doing is running a greater than, lesser than logical sequence. Each of these market marks, when coming to the algorithm, get interpreted at this layer into scenarios that combine different market conditions. So one of those scenarios might be X1. One of the scenarios might be Y3. One of them might be, Z4. You name it. And the merit order algorithm is basically going to be taught to calculate how these scenarios come together. Now, the reason you have scenarios is because there's going to be operational constraints on what you can and can't do. For instance, I can't decide to sell the output of my cogeneration plant based in the microgrid to the wholesale power market around me if I promised to provide that power on site because there is a power quality issue with using grid imports or something like that. I can't arbitrage my gas transportation capacity, the money I'm paying to move gas on the pipeline to my cogeneration plant. I can't arbitrage that and sell that out to the market if I need that gas to run my plant, to do all these other things. So there's constraints in how these scenarios work. And the scenarios will be things such as, cogen plant operates and provides steam to this off-taker. The solar array is going to, provide power to this off-taker and so on. And so you have these combinations on the scenarios where based on different market marks, the microgrid, where we're taking this example, will be able to form different types of operational postures. Now, the merit order algorithm knows what each of these combinations can look like based on the different market marks, and will simply order them based on the operational posture, and basically kick out a response to a number of master agreements saying the merit order is selling, we're going to sell this much gas out to the gas market and not use it to run because of the pricing at this point in time. We're going to sell this much steam to this person because of the pricing at the time. We're going to sell this much solar output to this person. We're also going to import this much power from the local utility at this rate because we can make more money on selling out to the wholesale market for that component of the load we need to serve on site. There really is a ton of different combinations. And if one of the things that's kind of making your head hurt a little bit about this is, wow, like Chris is talking about a microgrid. I thought power plants basically, ran. They're unprecedented powers. Never has been assets that combine load and generation in a unified resource. Often that combines a ton of small aggregates, a bunch of smaller resources that can be as flexible as microgrids. Resources out there, and I'll give you an example. Princeton University, that runs one of the most advanced integrated microgrids in the world, folks I had the pleasure of working with regularly, they can respond to the grid operator in New Jersey, in PJM, to basically help keep the frequency on the overall grid balanced at 60 hertz. They can put upwards of 6 megawatts of power onto the grid to lead or lag the frequency signal in less than 2 seconds. They use it using air-derivative turbines in a cogen system. Actually, all same things that the F-15s used to use. But the reality for microgrids is they can form all these different postures, which makes this more complex. So we're looking at what the markets indicate. The system, the program, pulls the marks from the markets, pulls them into a merit order algorithm, builds the scenarios first, and then runs the scenarios, through the merit order algorithm. And then it outputs saying, this is how everything should operate to make the most money at this point in time. So what happens is, how does it actually execute a system like this? So it comes down and you have So imagine this across all of these. So you have basically the signal from the merit order algorithm saying, okay, let's say we're going to sell this much power, this many megawatts of power out to the market, megawatt hours of power out to the market. It sends the signal. The parties that I'm selling the power to already have a master agreement in place. That's this outer layer. And that's a written contract. However, the confirmation process and the execution of the confirmations in that is programmed. It's automatic, it's self-executed. So it takes this signal, pulls in the market mark, and then automatically generates at this layer here, the program layer, automatically generates the confirm, and then starts the execution sequence, which can be through an exchange, through a contract like the ISDA, another mechanism agreement. And those are often, especially if it's through exchange and so on, those can get handled through electronic clearinghouses, all the rest of it, it can all happen electronically. So that's the self-executing part. But let's say there's a problem. Let's say the deal goes through and someone said, you know what, for whatever reason, we can't perform the way the confirmation is expected to. Maybe we're in a forced outage, maybe there's some other kind of operational problem, or maybe, just maybe, I look at my liquidated damages for not performing with you, and this other guy I can sell it to is going to be 25% above those liquidated damages, so I'll default and pay you the penalty and go this way to sell to someone else. But whatever it ends up being, the outer layer here, which isn't programmed, but this is the contractual layer. And that's the master contract layer. So when there's a dispute, it kicks out of the automatic self-executing program layer to the master contract layer, where the parties can get together and go through a dispute resolution sequence, whatever it might be. Often, in my world, we force the executives to get together and try to work it out. And if they can't do it, then we either move on to arbitration, mediation, litigation, and so on. But
A nice cup of tea.
yeah, nice cup of tea. I'm not a litigator. I like to say when you're doing deal work, folks, you know, you deal with that stuff as you have to. But I like the constructing and building part of the law. I have a lot of respect for the litigators who handle stuff and shit hits the fan.
Actually, if I may, one more little just kind of practice note of what we're doing. Piece of
Yeah.
So as you're talking, I'm just pulling out a few little nuggets for later to feed into the breakout sessions. And one of them, so on dispute resolution, you mentioned, you know, there's like, I don't know, a complaint, and some of this stuff is like, you know, the thing didn't process, oh, you haven't updated your drivers to the whatever. So it's like just little stuff, operations. Then you mentioned litigation is like, really, that would be the end of the road.
Well,
But in the middle, though, what I wanted to highlight is that when you're architecting these systems, there's a lot of opportunity to build in, but not even external arbitration, but just like review, you know, almost sort of like a, and I've done this in quite a few commercial systems where you may have like a panel of folks that are neutral or that have some from each role, like the suppliers and the buyers and the vendors and the transaction processors. They kind of look at things and try, sort of make a call, and then perhaps at the end might even as an escalation internal before you even get to anything like arbitration or anything like the formal dispute resolution, could actually help basically work out, not like mediation, but like maybe work out like, oh, here's the interpretation of that role, or they can basically absorb a lot of the impact of big disputes internally within the system. As part of an escalation procedure, you can even, you know, kind of put warnings, suspensions, and so forth before you kick it out to dispute. So the idea of composition of systems that are contract-based and have like a rules layer, like in a master agreement, that can contain transactions. One of the big rewards you get when you bother to think something through so much is on the myriad opportunities to massage dispute resolution so that sometimes it doesn't even write into what we call a dispute.
That's right.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's right. And where you can avoid that, it's very helpful. And a lot of times the disputes around this can be fairly clear cut and handled almost programmatically. I didn't deliver as much as I said, but you think your meter indicated that you delivered more. And someone would say that's where having metering networks use distributed ledger technology to provide transparent recordation and so on, you know, can be important. You know, metering, the core question of how much did I give to you or didn't give to you, you know, and assuring that meter calibration and all the rest of it stays correct is a big deal, because the commodities, you know, a lot of the folks, you know, I work with in the commodity space, I mean, it's, you know, several billions of dollars of value through putting through their systems. Yeah. But this example here, though, is an example of something a single entity would do in making an operational decision. If we use the microgrid example, the person running this calculation could be, for instance, the energy developer that was retained by the host, let's say Army base through an enhanced use agreement, you know, enhanced use leasing, or a utility energy services, you know, agreements, you know, energy service performance contract type thing. It could be, you know, any number of people who are actually, you know, live on the campus where the microgrids get installed. But you don't have to have the person who's enjoying the benefits of it also be the person who builds it, operates it, and importantly provides all the upfront capex to put in place to finance it. And so this is an example where you could have a third-party finance and develop microgrid. There are certain business rules to how the microgrid needs to be operated. For instance, if the grid is out, you will keep the lights on the communication center on the base going regardless. It's the top of the critical load list. It's not on the load shed list. But in this example, you factor those dynamics here into the scenarios on how the scenarios could form, those constraints, those business rules for on-site, as we call them. But this whole process could be run on a daily basis by the energy developer who's owning and operating the microgrid, who again has the ability to provide power to everybody in the microgrid from either importing power from the grid or by making it within the microgrid, any number of different ways. They would be the one running this decision tree calculations to determine what is the highest and best value of what I have for all these assets. Now, why is this kind of cool in the context of a microgrid? And why is this important going ahead for smart infrastructure in general for this country? Smart infrastructure can actuate. Smart infrastructure has the ability to have more granular data measurements, has the ability to actuate and provide more flexible services, to provide the base that can open up new market layers and things like that. And so what you see here in this decision-making sequence is all enabled by the fact that I actually have physically these arbitrage opportunities, that these scenarios come together where I can do these arbitrages. So where does this kind of thing make sense? It makes sense when you're building on infrastructure. There's a lot of actuation, flexibility on how it can operate, on how it can assume a whole bunch of different operational profiles. One of the first things that introduced me to this was working with clients in the mining sector who ran smelters and had big power plants on site to run those smelters, because if you want to use a lot of juice, run an arc furnace. Man, they use a lot of power. And at the same time, a lot of those clients had to ask themselves on any given day, given the pricing on the London Metals Exchange, is it more attractive economically for me to use the power to smelt metal? Or is it more attractive economically for me to use the power plant that I also own that's on site and just sell power to the market? How do I make that decision? That's an example of the initial arbitrages that's been going. And in the commodity space, in particular in the power space, the over-the-counter market, the bilateral market for these kind of arbitrages is really substantial. And again, people will set them up where when it comes to taking custody and instrument transfer, this stuff can still get handled on the mechanism contract that executes. And maybe that's trading a contract on Intercontinental Exchange, maybe that's trading any number of ways, but the agreement between the parties to undertake the action to execute on the exchange or in the over-the-counter market is based on the relationship established in the master agreement, which I tell clients, if you have the opportunity for a multi-point arbitrage and to run an economic mirror order through your own operations, make sure your master agreements have the flexibility within them to do that. Don't bind yourself in how you agree to perform and provide goods and services in a way that you can't take advantage of, say, a really, really cold winter in New England. Everyone cranks up their gas heating, and all of a sudden, the price to move natural gas from down in Louisiana all the way up to Boston is now like $38, $42. And of that $38 and $42, how much of that do you think actually goes to pay for the gas itself? About $4. So the understanding what the different flexibilities that can come are important to doing this. And what makes it a smart contract system, as we call it, is that all of the master agreements that have the program self-executing components all feed into an overall unifying merit order algorithm that automatically pulls the market marks into it to maximize profitability through the operational postures that you have the ability to assume. That right there, again, why is this so great in an example of a microgrid? Why is this so great going forward? Is that as we adapt smart infrastructure, whether it's transportation sector, whether it's the power sector, as we have that smarter, more actuating infrastructure, we're going to be able to do more in terms of how we maximize the economics. Entities can maximize the economics around it. And that also includes having market marks here that have not existed before that represent market layers that are opening up because the technology allows for more transactive interaction between people that used to just be customers, but now are both customers and suppliers and producers at the same time. And that's when you look at what's happening with some really fascinating stuff that LO3 and other folks are doing, and I've had the pleasure to work with the LO3 guys.
Oh,
The Brooklyn microgrid folks,
microgrid.
yeah. It's all about using distributed ledger technology to have a immutable ledger that allows you to open up market layers and provide for transactive dynamics between folks that haven't occurred in the past. And what ties them all together? The great app, the nifty interface, the same thing that makes it easy for the consumer to do so and to feel like they're participating. What has to catch up in my space to all this that's going on right now are the rules, the law. I like to joke about microgrids. The one thing that every jurisdiction in the country has common around microgrids is that their legal framework is not set up to accommodate, which can be great for attorneys because I do an awful lot of structuring work. When someone says, I want to have this microgrid, we come in and say, well, here's how you have to structure the deal to get it done. But you know, folks talked about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, unfortunately, the microgrid regs that they're considering, the laws that they're considering now, are really restrictive for third parties to come in, develop, and own and operate microgrids. And that's really problematic because one of the deal structures that we're seeing emerge in the smart grid space is the concept of someone coming in and saying, hey, if you let me provide you with energy services over the long term, or part of your energy services over the long term, and I'm confident that you're going to stay operating, paying your bills and so on, we're seeing energy developers more and more being comfortable entering into really long-term deals with microgrid customers and so on and others to provide energy services. And you know, with that comes the energy developer doing third-party finance, bringing the capital to kind of make it happen. And that kicks a lot of this into the project finance space. From what Michael was talking about yesterday and so on, project finance is all based on off-taker credit. The credit, the person who's buying what I'm selling them. And so there are a lot of dynamics there. But what you see here is an example of a dynamic that a single entity could do. Now imagine multiple entities who begin to have the flexibility because they've adopted more smart infrastructure and more smart operational systems, beginning to undertake these arbitrages, these dynamics, and so on. And imagine the points, the markets that can feed and create different operational scenarios and conditions expanding. And that's really what Daz and I have talked, we both find really exciting about not only what's happening with distributed ledger technology, automated contract systems, smart contracts, and these self-executing program systems. It really is, it really is pushing, in lockstep with the drive for better stuff. And when I mean better stuff, I mean your iPhone, your equipment, all of our electronic devices, all of our equipment. One thing that you could say is pretty common is that they keep adding capabilities, they keep adding functionality, they keep adding flexibility, and they keep providing, and that's not just on an electronic basis, that's gonna be the roads you drive on, that's gonna be the power systems that you use, that's gonna be the water systems that you use, the waste systems. More and more of that is coming, and to achieve that kind of symbiosis of input and output in our society, we're gonna need to have the software and operational layers that can build off of that smart infrastructure. And again, microgrids are an example of that. And this type of automated contract system, even though this is an example of just one entity doing it, is I think where a lot of the future is going.
Here, here. Thank you. That was awesome. So that was awesome. I'm glad to finally kind of give you the space to say that all the way through and then to be able to go back and hear it again and kind of, more absorb everything that you said. But one thing I want to just highlight before we go forward, that person liked it too. Calling to throw some flowers at your feet.
Now, one thing I'll note too is that the merit order algorithms.
That's what I was going to exactly what I want to bring up.
This is exactly how the auction markets work in the power sector.
So
when you bid into the day-ahead market to say, I'll sell X amount at this price, and you basically submit your curve to the person who's running the market. These people, they basically submit a curve of what they'll produce. The energy markets and the rest of them run a merit order algorithm, and they clear the system based on the last unit running. So before they handle congestion dynamics and so on, in many of the power markets around the world, what happens is they run merit order, and the last unit running that has to run to serve load, the price that it quotes then clears the market. And you get to that price through a merit order algorithm.
So you did it.
It's called merit order dispatch. Yeah.
Dispatch. So what I was going to ask or say or highlight and then ask you to extrapolate on a little bit. Or maybe you may want to extrapolate a little more. Is that if you look at a lot of what we see here, I'd say is good. Not just, but it's fundamentally good lawyering. It could be occurring in papyrus. But you have like a master agreement, and you've got contracts and transactions and reporting. So
self-execution gets you to speed.
The part of it that I want to highlight is there's something that allows for an algorithmic optimization that permits, in this case, a transactional network, I would call this, to support and reflect the business priorities, and to operate according to the legal arrangements, because the technology basically correctly implements the rules. I think that there's something that we are. So as we look forward, I think when we build things, we should all contain the idea of what Chris is calling a merit order, say, algorithm, perhaps.
It's a greater than sequence. Is this scenario greater than this scenario? And you combine the scenarios that can exist physically in the real world, and you test one against the other. And when you get to the end of the greater than sequence, they'll order themselves in merit.
Yeah. So let's call it like it's a procedure, and it's a computation. That's the word I'm looking for, because this is about computational law. And so what we have here is something that is the result of inputs that actually are ascertainable based on data through sensors and through interfaces that are telling us what's happening.
That's exactly right.
That's critical for this way of thinking. Okay, so that like narrows the field in some ways, but we've got plenty of situations like that, and increasingly situations are like that. Number two, the rules assume that the data is coming in an expected format, and that there's a system that will process the rules, and that they can apply the rules such that there's an agreed prioritization and a merit order in this case would pop out. Like there are other kinds of optimizations where we're looking to do like maybe load balancing or other sorts of things.
And those would kick in as constraints that would constrain the scenarios and what the scenario values would reflect before it ran there.
Before, yeah. And
so you have the operational century constraint helps to form the scenarios combined with the market marks, which are, it could be, NYMEX says this is the price of this contract for this day.
Bingo. So now we talked about the inputs, we talked about the processing according to rules, and then there's a output. And so the output might be like popping the final price on something and like releasing.
The output of this usually kicks out to the person who's running it. So like a single entity is making this decision on the deals they want to do with a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
It will kick them out a spreadsheet that gives them the merit order, and then that spreadsheet will indicate that if they got it well, it'll set up to automatically send notices to the counterparty. It'll automatically fill in the confirm, send the confirm to the counterparty, and then execute execute the confirm.
Notices and execute what?
And it would basically automatically fill out the confirm, send the confirm to both parties, and the terms of the master agreement would have the confirm self-execute. And then you'd have the master agreement usually provides for some kind of corrective or true-up cycle if there was an issue with the volumes or something like that was happening.
Dynamite. Okay, so before we kind of get, how are we doing time? Okay, we're doing great on time. So before we kind of get to the next phase where we take some of the concepts that Chris mentioned and kind of work with them a little bit, there's a few tools that Brian and methods that Brian and I will help backfill. I think all the Brians can probably help because we're all somewhat hacky. And then, but I want to ask, is there any kind of reflections or comments or questions, observations on what we just heard? Tammy.
I was wondering, you were saying how you see microgrids being in the future, so when the rules kind of allow for that to happen, do you still see a need for like a microgrid at all, or? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the megagrid serves, I mean, if you have on-site generation, let's say you can afford to put on-site generation and put it up, or you do a deal where you get a service provider to do it. You're basically using your ongoing load as an asset to get the deal working. You know, you will still look at the main grid as backup, as a battery. Part of what makes a lot of these arbitrages work is that unless the microgrid needs to island, in other words, close its circuits and stay powered when the grid around it is down. Unless it needs to island, many microgrid customers don't care if the power is being imported off the grid and being procured by their microgrid operator, or if the power is coming directly from the powerhouses within the microgrid. And so, you know, obviously, if you need to island, then the business rules will kick in, and the microgrid operator will be told you need to, keep running internally. Now that's easy too, because you can't really export if the grid is down, unless you're helping with restoration. But you know, it is a very interesting question. The price of when I first got started in the clean energy space, you'd go to a renewable energy conference and you were likely to hear a drum circle outside. And you know, over the years, that evolved to where, you know, the community would get together at the Waldorf Astoria, and it became a major investment. And more investments been made in clean energy and renewables, you know, over the last few years than any of the other energy, you know, sources globally, and it's really pulling ahead. There was just a solicitation out in Colorado by Excel, the utility, looking for long-term energy sources. And solar and wind plus battery storage beat out coal, natural gas, all of the other sources of the cost. So I really firmly believe that our grandkids are going to look at us and be like, in a world where most of the buildings didn't power themselves, that's just bizarre. You combine that with advances in flow batteries, like graphene-based batteries. You combine that with advances in solar. The people have now gotten solar cells down to the less than a width of a human hair, and so we are just years away from your next hoodie powering your iPhone. I kid you not. And so we really are going to a world where it's going to move to a distributed mesh. And what that's going to mean is we're still going to have the main grid, the transmission system, and a lot of the key existing central station power plants, but they're going to operate more as a catch-all and a backup or kind of a marginal provider, where going into the future, most of the energy we use is going to be generated locally, on-site and so on. Now, there are challenges. There's, for instance, not enough free land in Puerto Rico to satisfy that grid's need with solar and battery storage. And solar efficiencies aren't going to come down, for quite some time, to that level for quite some time. That's why places like that, you're still going to need, hopefully they'll get some LNG gasification terminals, done, and they can start using, natural gas on site and so on, not the heavy bunker oil, that they use now, which is really nasty stuff to burn as power. There is going to be a need into the future. It's not going to go the way of the horse and buggy, kind of as fast as the adoption of the automobile, but it's going to streamline and it's going to become a whole lot smarter. And by that I mean we're going to have more sensory, more controls, and the grid is going to become dramatically more self-healing, such that when there's a problem, the grid will be able to isolate the problem, and instead of having a cascade of multiple circuits going down, just one or two will go down again, and distributed resources will be able to hold the grid up. And so, yeah, it is going to happen, but probably not in our lifetimes, or maybe at the very end of our lifetimes.
Would there be a consolidation of all the utilities then, so that, because who's going to be in charge, and how would the utilities make money if they're managing and not?
Well, that's the penultimate question that utilities face right now: is how do we make money when the traditional model is we get paid for every electron we deliver. Well, in a world where it's not just about the electron being delivered, but what's the quality of service and the options I have on how that electron is being delivered, utilities are having to change their business model. And this is something I work on an awful lot in my work representing the Microgrid Resources Coalition, and with a lot of utilities, clients, and others. I'll point out that the utilities that are smart and forward-looking have realized that the days of their business model operating like a pipeline from big power plants down to consumers are ending, and the days of them operating like a platform where multiple service providers can utilize it to provide a whole host of services, that's where the future is going for the utility sector.
Thanks, Tammy. So we've got a couple of good questions on Telegram.
Yes, that's
exactly, I think. So, Mr. Poppers, what do we have on Telegram?
Yeah, well, it's great because I read into some of the questions. So Amanda Brown asks if you have any research or examples of failure of these sequences because of business inputs. And then also, how can or do you expect artificial intelligence to optimize these grids?
So the first one, certainly seen failures in automated contract systems, but that's when you have the outer layer of the master agreement that provides the overall, nature of the bargain, including, as Daza put up, what's the dispute resolution sequence. And so the system kicks out, does an automatic confirm. I see it. I look at the market and I say, wait a minute, I don't expect this. I thought I was going to get paid more per our agreements. Then, you're going through a dispute resolution sequence. But the way we set these up is that the master agreements allow the flexibility for the person who's running the merit order on how they want to operate in the most economically, beneficial manner, constrained by, business rules and security and safety constraints, obviously.
And so actually, while we're on failure mode, this is really critical because it gets us into self-healing and the capability to adapt, which is a big part of the smarts. And so you talk a little bit about when things have gone awry, when there's been these sort of failures or needs to have conversations or to take other measures that are remedial. Where do they happen? And in particular, the smart grid land is great, but in particular when you do these largely automated legal systems, where are these failure points that you've noticed?
I think the failure point comes in, I think there's a central assumption failure that happens by a lot of people who participate, in that they assume, especially if you're in a system where the algorithm is not being run by one entity, as in this one, but everyone is looking at multiple parties are relying on the output of the algorithm as to how they will transact, which is different from this one. This one party is being told by the algorithm what the highest and best use of their assets is from an operational standpoint, and then they execute that. But if you have multiple parties relying on the algorithm, and the AO example is a good example of this, and I understand the dynamics of that algorithm and how it's going to output given different conditions, and I, through AI, that I assume the, often, absolutely unexpected way an AI will get from point A to point B on something, is, that I have my mind wrapped around that. And that's when you end up, getting surprises. In my world, when you get to the point where a dispute's raised, it usually kicks in, the humans kicking in, and then taking a look and seeing how that looks and operates. The good news is that as you set these up right, they run on autopilot for years without problems. And they can, really, generate a ton more value than taking a more simplistic, process by process, transaction by transaction approach. The AI is fascinating on a lot of this stuff. I think I actually look at AI as a safety net function for how a lot of these would operate, in that, the AI would be able to take in a broader range of data points on, operational, physical, financial market conditions, and then be able to, catch where, basically inform you where one scenario, because of this particular set of conditions that comes out here, might be really pushing it. And so I see AI as at least initially providing a safety net as these systems set up, and eventually, it'll do more than just inform as an input to the merit order. It'll run the merit order itself, probably against multiple merit orders, and then all kinds of logic sequences that I have no idea what they're called.
Right. Just perfect. So Mila, were you?
The camera girl has a quick question.
Okay.
This is kind of a broad question, but what are your thoughts on algorithm collusion? Do you think AI could help to sort some issues that may arise due to that?
I kind of like, that if you had an AI who could come in and say, an AI could help someone understand how algorithms, including how the different output sets could look in a way that a bunch of humans who had each written a separate set of algorithms that they then try to stack up couldn't really wrap their mind around the way all those output sets could come. And so from an investment perspective, that means that I can't diligence the polls of my risk scenarios. And therefore there's potentially a risk. So, I look at AI as kind of at least initially as really serving as a safety net, but in advance as a diligence function, to be able to chart the white swan outlier scenarios that could kick out of an autonomous operation or combination of multiple algorithms.
Here. Good question.
And are there other countries that have optimized the use of microgrids?
Not really yet. They're I would argue that the most advanced grid integrated microgrids are here in this country. Princeton University is an example, and so on. You have other countries that are pushing forward on remote microgrids. A lot of folks are looking to parts of the developing world, and others that have yet to have parts of the world that, for instance, totally skipped over landlines and went right to cell towers and so on, who found that they could get over credit issues with microtransactions in telecom by establishing payment histories through phone transactions and so on. And so there are a lot of places where, if the grid is not already built out, people are looking at what's called remote microgrids, which are basically microgrids that always are in island mode, just powering themselves. But the cool thing about microgrids is all of the technological pieces that go into them we have. And there's really not a technology risk so much to them. It's just really a regulatory risk, execution risk.
Oh. And we have some ideas about how to structure the technical distribution such that it may not be legitimately is not construed as a distribution of power to a consumer, may avoid, not evade, some of the regulation.
No, that's right. As we discussed yesterday, there's a kind of a core dynamic that you see in a lot of jurisdictions where, what triggers utility status is not, making power or steam, producing it, but rather distributing it, one entity distributing it to another. And so you create a self-distribution within the microgrid, and it basically turns the microgrid into kind of, one chunk as the utility sees it. The microgrid itself is a utility customer. And the operator, interacts with the utility, and so on.
So did you know one thing that came up at dinner last night, just informally, was the question of transactions and what is a transaction exactly? A transactional network and versus interactions. Somebody brought up these networks are really about interactions. So one of the things that you noted was from a legal perspective, which is reflected with regulation, when you have an entity that distributes, in this case, energy to another entity, that triggers a legal regime. And there's a certain common design pattern, I think, in the law, where we talk about the type of interaction, where it's an interaction between two entities, by which we mean legal entities, so someone can sue and be sued, not like in a very broad sense, like shipping and receiving is an entity, like in like an object model in an ERP system, we totally call it an entity. And versus like accounting is an entity. but a legal entity, I think, was implied in your language.
A person,
A legal
including
person.
artificial persons.
Yeah. So there's something about I want to say like legal entity interactions, and then playing. So one of the things that we might want, that we'll probably want to play with. When we get into I'll call it like, you know, kind of architecture modeling mode, and will be this really interesting idea of structuring the system such that it is coterminous with a legal entity. Like, so we've created a 501c6 trade association for the consortium, or we've created a quasi-public entity for the port authority, or we created a whatever, you know. So this idea of having an entity that is a single legal entity within which we can encapsulate and structure a bunch of transactions and layer them at the high level master rules level, the contract level, the transaction level, interaction, logging level, activity level, I think is going to be powerful.
Yeah, it's the power of the collective. And you know, notwithstanding all my comments on, you know, cryptocurrency and libertarian dynamics, my view of the markets is very libertarian. You know, all about non-discriminatory access, you know, a fair payment for performance and service, and so on. And you know, the really fascinating part of this is, you know, in the future you're going to have utilities, your local utilities have a ton of contracts with all the microgrids in your neighborhood. And you know, a lot of places are going to have several microgrids in the town, in the city, or whatever. And at any given time, that utility can, in an emergency, you know, if a tree comes down or something like that, can tell all those microgrids to assume any number of different profiles. So one microgrid, they might say, island, cut off all load, we don't need to have that interaction. Another microgrid, they might say, wait, and in 5 minutes, I'm gonna ask you to export this much power to your substation. You know, another microgrid, they might say, you know, export, but this much of your export, lead the frequency signal. And other microgrids, they might say, okay, the grid around you is down, I need you to spin up your frequency and basically come up to grid edge, you know, standing right, you know, synchronous, so that as soon as we throw the breaker, there's not a, you know, there's not an impact of you coming back on the system. In other words, it's kind of lets them send less power to a substation to bring it back up, because that substation doesn't have to pull up the load from the microgrid the way it does everybody else when it comes back online. And so the future of the smart grid is all of these dynamic, flexible assets that are highly dispatchable into multiple different markets that can get called by the utilities in emergency conditions to essentially self-heal the distribution grid. And that's really what is kind of the cool future on how this stuff is going.
Pretty good. And Brian.
So I'm sorry.
I'm listening.
I need to duck out for a half hour.
Okay. Tighten up on Brian. Okay, that's okay. That's really cool. So actually, we're just about at a break point, and then I'd like to ask, when you come back, do you want to? Can you
I have
join
some
a team?
updates about the
Block
wallet stuff.
Okay, some updates with block, and then okay. Like, are you going to come back with your? Can you come back with the MIT student that is your hacker? If you can, like, I invite you to do
Today?
that. Or okay, tomorrow's fine. So when you come back, like, get ready to jump on a team.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So let me do one more sweep before we start to wrap this segment. Any other questions or comments from any legal entities? Anything from non-legal entities? Objects, toasters, nothing? That program you ran?
I'll just point out to DLA that, you know, with a few tweaks to FAR, and in particular some of the, you know, the FEMP stuff and model agreements and around utility energy service agreements and enhanced use leasing, this model can begin to get adopted by the military. And by having that third-party operator and so on, assuming they pass all the security, you know, dynamics and so on, you know, that has a third entity doing the financing, a third entity selling the products and goods and services out to the market, and so on, so that, you know, you guys don't have to, you know, run afoul of any of the rules against alienation, and so on. The key thing that we noticed is that the tweaks to allow you guys to go further out in term into those agreements, because longer terms often underlie people wanting to make these big investments in, substantially sophisticated microgrids. That, once I invest in, I spend, $75 million to build it, I want to know that I'm going to be allowed the rights to operate it to recover my investment over the next, 25, 30, 40 years. But if you guys could use, if you could lock in, special service, bid agreements for, you give a utility energy services agreement to a microgrid operator, like say an NRG who comes in to build it and develop it for you. If you were able to, agree that when that term ends and a new one's established, that they would be in a position, because they own the microgrid infrastructure, you guys are either buying out at that point after grid depreciation, or you agree to re-up with them because they are in a unique position to sole source, given what they've done and what they continue to do. You could kind of do that, and that was one of the messages that when myself and a bunch of other folks met with some of the flag officers of the Navy and the heads of NAVCOM and some of the other folks there, it was kind of one of the messages we got across, which is that you can be more resilient, pay less from a levelized cost of energy if you go bigger and adapt more substantial and robust systems, including sending tendrils off the microgrid on the base so that the first responder center, the gas station locally, stays up so you can keep pumping it for the vehicles, and stuff like that. So there's
So can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Do you foresee different profitability standards in the future for the different customer base, like if it's an industrial base, military base, like a commercial base, residential base in the future?
Yeah, I mean the economics are running better and better and better. I mean, I can't. I mean, the Excel solicitation that just happened is an example of where you have the economics just getting increasingly more attractive. I think that you'd be very surprised if you offered if a microgrid concession agreement for a base to provide energy services for an energy developer on like a 30-year or a 25 with a re-up for another 20, how low those bids would come in. It would really be substantially impactful. I mean, just to give you an example, right now I'm seeing developers bite on deals and agree to outlay substantial sums for development based on pricing dynamics where we tell them that their price ceiling for what they can charge the customers in the microgrid is basically floating with their local utilities default tariff. So whatever they would just pay had they never signed up for anything other than just using normal power from their local utility creates the ceiling on what the microgrid operator is allowed to charge the customers on the microgrid. And even with that ceiling, we're seeing microgrid operators feel very comfortable to take that risk, mainly because they view not the commodity charges, but the demand charges for utilities going up in the future as they transform, less from pipelines more to platforms, and platforms are more about, the types of value that's, manifest in demand charges.
And we talked a little bit about that yesterday under DoD utility privatization program that they have.
Yeah, that kind of program is great, and I would just encourage, people to, begin to think, in an integrated fashion about this. I mean, a lot of the procurements that DoD, one of the issues that you guys have a lot of times is the term of the procurement makes it that sometimes pricing and technology, I mean, for example, the bids we see in solicitations now are kicking the butt by 12 cents of the bids we saw last year in some places. So the pace of technologies, especially around battery costs and things like that, are really coming down substantially.
Just to double check, did that sort of got at the economic question about the residential? Did that answer the question? Yes. Oh, that's great, really great. Any other questions or thoughts? David?
Yeah, you briefly mentioned batteries, and my understanding is that one of the things that makes energy markets different is that it's all there's no ability to store energy at load. So there's like Powerwall and things like that where now energy can be stored, or capacitors. Can you speak to any of these technologies for storing energy for the future without producing?
Well, the most obvious one is actually one that we're all used to. You're sitting in a battery right now. This building's a thermal battery. And any building that has decent insulation is in itself a thermal battery, which is why moving the thermostat up and down and so on can do that. I have a client that, has just, their IRR is off the charts now. I think they recovered their investment in like 2.5 years, something like that. They just built a big thermos. Okay, I'm serious. Big thermos, half underground, half above ground. And when power's cheap, you make chilled water. When power's expensive, you use chilled water. And that simple arbitrage, in terms of them being on a time of day rate, even around their demand charge and so on, or a basic time of use, simple time of use in this case, allows them to do that. So all of our buildings, and this is why we have demand response markets and so on, all of our buildings themselves are thermal batteries. We event for electrical storage, Powerwall, those are great examples. Our entire transportation fleet is going to be a battery in a few decades, and are going to be able to, imagine charging networks to be able to stop charging all the cars hooked up to the chargers for like the next 4 seconds, and then they deploy a fraction of the battery charge based in all those batteries in their cars back to the grid to balance the frequency signal, and then immediately flip back to charging them back. And then the people in those cars get paid a fractional differential, the delta, between what it would have cost to buy the power versus the value of selling it back in that flash of a moment in time. And so battery costs have a lot to do with it. That was really the most unique thing about the latest Excel solicitation by this big Colorado utility, was that the solar costs, the wind costs for like the solar and wind, wasn't too much less than last year, but the battery costs went down like dramatically from last year. And the people who are starting to give quotes around flow batteries as opposed to lithium ion are really, that is getting indications that those are going to begin to rule in terms of cost, dynamics. They really have great potential.
Okay, so I want to do one little wrap up of 3 or 4 concepts that we can ruminate on, then take a coffee break, bio break, and then come back and then we'll break into teams and we'll do some modeling. It'll be iterative. Okay, so here's how I'm going to do it. I want to try something a little bit fancy. So hopefully this won't not work. Here we go. Go here, go here, go here. Okay, let's see if we can. Oh my God, it's kind of working. All right, so awesome. Could you check to see if we are great? Okay.
What is it?
It's just green through the.
Yeah,
because this is an environmentally friendly class.
You might need to jiggle the HDMI cable.
Also,
yeah, there it goes.
Really?
Now it's back. No, do it.
Jiggle.
Yeah, it's.
Is it
Just hold it like that.
still good? Is it good?
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Actually, the blue tone is a little bit more healthy, I'm told. Okay, then. So is that right, or is that unhealthy?
Well, it's going to keep you
Blue
alert. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I want to first of all show, for those of us that aren't familiar with these, I want to show 3 things for modeling, so we can get a feel for some of the things that we're about to draw on, and then just do a quick round of some of the concepts. So this is a kind of a use case. It's a UML use case, Unified Modeling Language. This is a classic. I just got it at random on Google, but a classic type of use case where we have some actors and some actions. So we have a registered customer, a new customer, and I won't go too deep, but they view items. And so the most important thing, you see how there's a box here. The box represents, let's call it like almost like a reference boundary or like the scope of the question. So these could be very broad. They could be very like painfully granular and small and narrow. This one is of a online shopping system, like imagine Amazon or even a variant of eBay potentially. This is more like an Amazon with a shopping cart kind of metaphor. Okay, so you can view items, make purchase, check out, client register. I'm not sure what that is in this context, but so we take the first three. There's a pretty definite flow here, and then the arrows are they're doing irregular use of arrows. Maybe I have to understand why they're doing it, but typically you'd expect to see some back and forth between view items. That would actually we would say like add items to shopping cart would be the slightly more modern way we'd say that, and then at some point you would do checkout, and then there's a purchase flow off the side. And you could, a lot of people spend their whole life just in the purchase flow. Like that's all of the use cases that they do in their companies. And then there's some, if we did a much more granular breakdown, we'd have a whole thing with like the orders and receipts and the back and forth and the tracking. But this is like, I'd say a reasonable level of altitude to just get an appropriate engineerable squib on an e-commerce purchase. And over here, we've got something that's happening. There's a service here, and it's authentication. So there's some sort of username and password, and so this person has an account. There's an identity provider. There's some, they do say there's a payment service. Talk about PayPal by name in this case. So these are other actors, you could say. The authentication service probably built into the system here. It doesn't have to be. If you have an external identity provider, for this person, it could be Google or log in with Facebook or something. That's one way to do it, and it counts to a system here. I noticed the identity provider is going to check out into view items. Not sure exactly what that's about, but we can extrapolate reasons why they're doing that. And we've got a payment service. So this payment service, and then they say PayPal. So the payment service is probably something like a point of sale or like one of the payment processor services. That's a credit card, and PayPal is a specific it's a specific payment method with like a company. The service maybe provides 5 or 6 different methods potentially. So here we have like it's not perfect, but it's actually not bad. Just literally was the first thing I clicked on for use case. So you can imagine I would call this very much a business use case for a shopping cart system is what it seems to be. So I'm just going to like randomly click on 2 or 3 others. User, publisher, author. So you can imagine the author is, I don't know, like Brian from Thomson Reuters doing, I don't know, like data science projects I have loved before. The user would be probably me. I'd be the first buyer, and because I would like to read his book. Publisher, Amazon. Maybe it's a Kindle copy. Okay, so we have kind of a flow there. Here's like a. This is a classic one for any enterprise person. So we've got the actors is some like user. There's manage the user, you create users, read users, delete users, update users. This poor person's an admin somewhere, obviously, and they have to admin something. We should have a lot of cut them a lot of slack because they have a hard job. Now we have, but of course, holding the standards. And now we have oh, hello. What's this one? Transfer a court case to the company, register the court case, manage the case. Okay, I'm not sure what that's all about. I think I put in legal use case to see if something comes up. Still not much comes up apparently. Here's a bunch of use cases. Okay, so use cases are, what I want to highlight here is part of what I want us to do is to, when we're doing some use cases, to sort of extrapolate what we want to work on. And I think some people may want to do like Tammy, you might want to take on Michael Casey's case because I want like an internal advocate that's heard of it before, and sort of like write the use cases. Some people might want. We may or we may not want to do like a DLA case by name. We may want to do some other kind of case that's more abstract, or maybe you can do a commercial case that you can help us walk through. We could do, if people wanted to do a different sort, like I know you've been working on stuff, Brian, in like insurance industry or other things. We could absolutely do. We all don't even have to do microgrids, but let's just say we did microgrids. You might, but now imagine instead of microgrid, it's shopping cart for a moment. What I want us to do is write the actor and the action 3 ways, and I'll do it with this. I want the business role. This is the business role. It's a registered customer. How do you know if it's a business role? If you talk to the CEO or the CFO or the COO and said, what does this arrow represent, this sort of stick figure? They go, oh, that's the customer. They probably say that. But when I'm eliciting, I go and talk to those people and I ask them, and I draw the pictures and I ask them what they are. And I notice that they're all, or almost all, saying the same role name. That's what I write down and I call it the business role. So it's what the business, it's what the line officer would say, it's what the.
You may want to switch to you, because now it's showing it's only showing the web page. Switch back to you.
Huh? Oh, thanks. Good call. You are a good camera operator. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's awesome. Oh, I know what happened.
Yeah.
Wait, I wanted to get a picture.
Yeah, of course.
Beautiful.
Let's do it after hours.
Come back. Make some movements, please.
Do the proper slow wave.
Oh, right. Oh, the slow wave. Yeah, you'll see it. Poppers. In our award-winning slow wave. And so. So actually, I am gonna show this for a moment. I'll just describe it. So basically, so business is customer. This is like, call it a registered customer. Let's just say customer. Keep it real. We'll have to keep this dead simple to make progress in a couple hours. So customer. Legal role. Oh, that's interesting. So let's just postulate that this is like the sale of a book. Perhaps Brian's like soon to be award-winning, like book. Now we have, I'm going to say, if I want to know what is the prevalent legal framework that we're operating within, we could talk about this, but I would go Uniform Commercial Code Article 2, and I'd say sale of goods. Mm-hmm. Okay, and there's multiple legal regimes that apply in different ways. But if we were, then I'm not going to put a label on this person because the most prevalent, relevant context, I want to say consumer, merchant, consumer. If you go to the definition section, read how Article 2 comes together, consumer. I'm going to pretend all of this, I'm just going to concatenate it for the moment and into like just the online shopping system provider, and I'm going to call them merchant. That's the legal entity on the other side, just to have a dead simple system for a moment. I'm not going to go to all the partners and the payment system and the payment processor and everyone else. Let's just say on the other side, I would, if our use case was one of just looking at the user flow through a shopping cart and our relationship with the buyer, I'd say merchant. The legal thing I would say is merchant. From my perspective, by the way, from like a lawyer perspective, perhaps outside counsel, they'd be client actually. And but just in terms when we're modeling this system to build it, the legal relationships that you can model on a layer is merchant consumer. That'll tell us a lot. Is there implied warranty and merchantability? We can ask a bunch of good questions here. Now there's also a technical dimension. A technical dimension, this person would probably be user in 9 out of 10 systems. They'd be end user or something like that, right? Not necessarily. It could be something else, but and this would probably be like the system that they're operating within. So it could be our like inventory system, or it could be, actually somebody help me out here. Has anyone done a shopping cart anytime ever? Yeah, shopping cart system or platform. Anyway, there'd be 2 or 3 major big honking systems. We'd have like our user data, we'd have our user database authentication service. We'd have our inventory and our like catalog kind of system, something like that. We have some sort of like payment process. We have a payment system for sure, and then we have some sort of like transaction processing system. It keeps tracks of like everything that each of our customers ordered, so we can do different analytics on that and kind of pump out a receipt, that kind of stuff. So let's just imagine that like there's those 3 systems, and the technology person would almost certainly put those. That's what they'd be looking at, and they. So what we can do is, and so over here we could say like make purchase, if you want checkout. Let's say like checkout. If we just focus on that, would be the business thing. We would just call this checkout. That would be what the business person says. The legal person, I would say purchase of goods. Purchase of goods in an Article 2 transaction. I think that's literally what it's called. And then the technical person might actually also call it checkout. It depends on what they're modeling. So frequently I've noticed when I kind of do 3 words under the actors and the actions for business, legal, and technical, very frequently, this is normal and this is good actually, the same word is like very frequently the business word and the legal word is the same. Sometimes the business and or the legal word and the technical word is the same, like checkout would quite certainly be, would probably be what the techie people would call it and what the business people would call it. Like if you looked at their schematics and you just talked to them over lunch and say that's the checkout action in our use case. Well, we call it settlement. We might call it purchase of goods if we're looking at the transaction part, you know, but so sometimes the legal
Title transfer.
Title transfer, depending on what we're looking at. But that's why this is good. So like when all the words kind of line up, that's fine. What's interesting is when you elicit the business, legal, and technical words and they're a little different. That's why I'm recommending we bother just at least asking and quickly putting down the business, legal, and technical role and action. Because when they're different, we want to note that and say, oh, like there's a name for that. And that means there's a whole framework of thought around it. And we can actually look at the same stick figure and the same arrow and capture what otherwise could be weeks or months of meetings of people talking past one another. You know what's happening all the time. You can feel it. And so it can be an easy way to just put like these, I just like pile up the names under the same stick figures. David.
Yeah, so I got the example of the business role as the customer, the legal role is like the sale. The technical role, would that be like Amazon or like the interface? Yeah.
You're talking about like a web portal?
Yeah, the API.
So the interface points?
Yeah.
So are we identifying those interface points for each actor?
Yeah, let's break it down. And so we'll talk about it for, when we get back from the break, we'll figure out what we're specifically doing. But for a microgrid, what I would suggest we do at a high level in order to, so where I'd like to get to after the break, I think the most interesting thing that we can make progress on is an algorithm that is the contract in a sense. We didn't really, we just postulated as the contract or
at least the mechanism.
Sure.
The contract's mechanism.
Let us call it the contractual mechanism and the method by which the contract expresses itself. I mean, I have no problem with there being a PDF representation of it, but
to your point about the UCC and implied guarantees of merchantability and so on, if you do achieve a contract via software where the software demonstratively has all of the key elements that you need to have a contract under common law, and so on, but you don't go further, as we do almost all the time, in disclaiming certain warranties, saying that certain areas of the law are not going to operate and so on, what happens is you find yourself with the most core of the basic legal deal, but you then are going to be subject to whatever the common law is in that area as to how any other more complex things or situations result or come about. Yeah. So if you don't put it in contract, the law will fill in basically a default baseline for your contractual relationship between the two parties. That will be the Uniform Commercial Code and common law.
Can I raise this? There we go. Okay, great. I agree with what Chris just said. And I guess what I wanted to get at is what I want to suggest we try to get to is for computational contracts, which is kind of like the session today, is that we get to a process that does this. I think this is a real good one. It's generalizable. And so with that in mind, here's how I would, here's kind of like a level of abstraction that I think we can use so that we can start to block some things and start to model some stuff. So this is like a classic template to start, like kind of get you started in a use case. And maybe it'll be just one circle, or there may be 3 or 4 or 5. So I would say, let's say we're the lawyer on an engineering team, or we're CTO and also have part legal, or we're kind of a new merged unit of like legal and technology of the future. Like, and we're sketching out like, what are the schematics and requirements for the system that we're going to build? So we'll look at it from that perspective for a moment. It's very much an engineering perspective, which is good. We might say, okay, this is the, we're going to call this person the customer. He's the commissary on base or something. I don't know. We're going to call this I'm sorry, BLT. And this here, by the way, we're going to say this is the actor. We're going to call this the action. Legal would be, let's just call it consumer for our purposes. And then technical might be, I think very technical would be user. Especially if they can also like Peapod, like at the commissary, and there's an app for that. I think the user is very typical. The use case might be sort of like, I'm just going to say, I'm really simplifying this, but like shop and checkout. So let's say like the business action would be checkout. The legal might be purchase of goods, which triggers actually a difference in rights and obligations between the parties, and like, you know, if you deconstruct it, that might be what we're zeroing in on. Purchase of goods, license of digital information, you know, something like that. And then the technical, I'm pretty sure, like at least on Teams, it's been years since I've done one of these, but we usually call it checkout also. Or it could be like transaction process. It depends on what the team is and what you call it. But the technical people will call it something like, here's the insight. And what they call it, we put here, like here. Insert, what the technical people call this. What do you mean? Well, draw a stick figure and a circle, and then say, when we say checkout, what do you call it? And then they'll say, we call it the Missile Command Subsystem for Authorization and Verification. And you write it, you know, or the acronym. And so now what we get from this is we can actually begin to have and we can begin, I'll tell you what we get. When we get number one, we can identify and we can align, we can harmonize, and we can integrate. And I'm speaking now very unacademically. I'm talking like right out of 200 pages of consulting. So we can like, number one, just identify what's going on here for like a new system. I don't know, maybe it's a kind of a carbon registry. Maybe it's a payment system.Maybe it's a microgrid. Maybe it's your dream system for your next procurement. And then you can align them. So what alignment means is, in the beginning, when I talk to people about stuff, it may be that the business people have like a stick figure. The technical people have had many meetings about this, and they're looking at using this new technology framework. There's actually like 3 stick figures. There's 4 stick figures over here, because one of them is like the subsystems in the apps marketplace of the thing that we're using, or they may actually introduce additional players doing some things. The legal people may not be aware of all the stick figures, or the legal people may assume that one of the stick figures is going to be the title insurer, obviously, right? Because you can't complete, everybody knows you don't complete this until there's that. But the business people may not have those stick figures. They may not have those steps. So the first thing we do when we identify stuff is we can align it. And then what I used to do in the old days is I would have like rice paper that I would draw on, and I would draw like the business, legal, and technical through a piece of rice paper and hold it up to like the land and be like, I don't know, do we have the same number even of stuff? And then sometimes there'll be lots of these things, but they'd be very different. And after conversation with people, we realize, oh, you have 3 things here, which is like review goods, sort goods, select goods, put goods here, like, but other people just have 1 circle, which is called shop, or whatever they said here. So we can actually sometimes collapse and just find the same level of abstraction, but other times we're talking about different things literally. So being able to elicit and align business, legal, and technical can be a really quick way to not dangerously talk past one another for too long and get anomalous results, you know, when maybe after it's too late. And then you can harmonize. Now there's opportunities to actually do like process re-engineering a little bit, to cause things to become faster, cheaper, better, to actually take some of like not just the drag of the law, but the wisdom of the law, Like maybe you want a title insurer here, maybe you want to have a step where you give people an opportunity to not buy before they buy, because that will overall reduce the number of chargebacks or something, or whatever it is. So like we can actually plumb the wisdom of the law, the rules, even if we end up avoiding a legal regime that is too cumbersome. We might want to identify a few of those things that are good best business practice, something like that, and take them. And same with technology. It's a lot of magic you can do with technology that may not be required or expected from the business or the tech or the legal people, but once they talk to the technologists, we discover there's all these almost like magical seeming capabilities of new technologies, that some of which we don't want the tail wagging the dog necessarily with legal and technical driving the business. In my view, I think business drives legal and technology, from a command perspective. But you could apprise the business people, the legal people of new technologies, and they may seek to adopt some of those at that time. They might not have been aware of them. And so there's a conversation that happens. And that's when we finally can integrate. So then at some point, you can actually send out an integrated system where the contract, it largely occurs through processes. Now, we could describe that solely in like written on papyrus and in parchment and everything. We can do it in PDF, we can do it in Microsoft Word. But we incorporate things by reference and supply chains and other things. Like the contract assumes, and we can describe and incorporate by reference ANSI standards or agreed taxonomies and agreed algorithms and models. I'm seeing this increasingly where we reference it and we say, look, the agreed model will be the then current version in GitHub as part of our continuous delivery thing, and that's what we all read the profile of a piece of software or a patch is going to be. Like, so there's lots of different ways to identify an algorithm or a process and actually cause it to be part of the contract in a useful way, and to set the rules around what that's going to be. But basically to have, well, like literally in the microgrid, this tells you what the transactions will be, right?
Oh yeah, it sets the scenario.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm following it. It's possible for all these things to be talking about the same thing.
Yep. Yeah, and actually, before we go forward, just to make sure we get David and then you and then you. So you said what is Amazon, and you said what is you had a list of things.
So in my head, I was
name a list at one point.
Yeah, I was thinking customers shop for a book on Amazon, right? So the business rules the customer. The legal rule will be the UCC, the sale of goods over, and then the technical rule will be the sale checkout on Amazon.
Yeah, the company checkout system.
It actually wouldn't be the UCC, it would be the terms and conditions that you sign. You sign up for Amazon.
Okay, yeah, there you go.
But the UCC recognizes the contract will control in the event that you don't have all the terms in the contract, it defaults to UCC. So yeah, we're on the same page.
Yeah.
And actually, can Kate, will you defer? You're next.
So I'm just wondering if we don't need a fourth actor, merit order, whether or not market as a system should be another actor.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, under shop, what are you shopping for and how is it pricing? That's kind of to your point, with a market actor, the markets are.
Well, if I'm a customer, I'm shopping for cows.
So
The lowest rate possible.
I promised you two things. This is the second.
Well, I'm sorry, if I'm the end user, that's what I'm shopping for. If I'm the microgrid enterprise, I'm shopping for the best.
Yeah, you're looking for the highest and best use, highest value for what I can sell. Yep.
I promised you two things. Can you see this pretty well?
I mean, are you talking here, Daza, basically about using algorithms to evolve and optimize and reduce process gates? Is that what this is?
Let me show you something first, very quickly, to answer a sense what you're asking is, could the market be an actor? Okay, so let me just answer that straight up, and you're going to love this, Chris. We haven't had a chance to talk about it, but prepare to be delighted.
Is it a condition or an actor?
It's so much more. How about a system that you can build and that achieves your dreams?
Well, yeah, I mean, the market itself, yeah. That's right.
A system is a type of an actor.
A system is totally a type of an actor, and it can be. So I want to show you this because of this obsessive focus on the law through this course. So a system can be an actor is almost like you say, obviously it's an actor from a technology perspective. It's like, what could be more of an actor than a system in most UML diagrams when you're sketching a system. So for example, we're about to hear about scratch blocks when we come back. When you draw system diagrams, a lot of times the client and the browser and the server and the service are all actors, right? So it's like from a technology perspective, it's almost like it's unusual to have humans as actors. It's very difficult to have the system and the market as an actor. But from a legal perspective, I want to point something out so that we can align things, I think, more efficiently and make more progress faster as a team, teams that we're working with. So this is, I would say, one way you could look at a commercial system. Do you know the 7-layer? Who knows NSI 7-layer stack? Anybody? Really?
Yeah.
Seriously?
OSI?
OSI, excuse me.
The gentleman.
Yeah, OSI. Okay, thank you. Yeah. All right, you must. Do you know the OSI 7-layer stack? Oh man. Okay. So anyway, in the day, this was canonical, and as a conceptual way to understand, networks. And so the NSI 7-layer stack is sort of like the trunk layer of like the big pipe, and then it's like the servers, and then the platforms and applications, and then like the platforms, and then the applications, and then the display that the user sees, and then the interaction point, like that you're clicking on or keyboarding or something in your terminal. It was that kind of stack, and it's just a very, very awesome way to understand the whole computing environment as a stack, and to know when you're on certain projects, you're working on certain things, and what layer of the stack are they operating on? The hardware layer, the software, what part of the software layer? And it was, what's interesting is almost nobody literally built their things around the OSI 7-layer stack, but it was a conceptual framework that really was huge, I think. It clarifies a lot of thinking. I still am on teams where people talk that way when we're just calibrating what we're talking about, the implications and where it fits in the big picture. So coming out of the 1990s and the emergence of the web, and people starting to transition our business interactions to electronic environments, and people wondering, like, how do we know what's happening and what fits where and what happens? And a group of people in an organization called CommerceNet got together over some years, and they came up with this concept of how you could look at transforming a business writ large to the world of the web. And so they say, well, the top we can imagine is something like the big network. Maybe that would be the internet today, or maybe it'd be like .mil in an app, or maybe it would be whatever the highest level network is within which everything happens. Okay? Inside of that, you can say we have a market. Okay, so on the web, we can totally say that we have any number of markets that operate on the web, solely on the web, or on we can say Swift and chips and Fedwire and other things are markets that operate on a big network that we can call the global payments networks, something like this. Like, you could say that. But you could also say we have, and then within markets, we have businesses. Businesses operates within markets. Businesses have services. Services have or contain interactions to, was it your point about interactions? So I was like, oh, I'm gonna show this like 7-layer thing tomorrow. If this is all about e-commerce, this would be transactions. But interactions is a more elegant way to say all the important things that happen. Like when you log in and become a customer of a site, that's more of an interaction, and it's very important. They said in the 90s documents, I'll forgive them, but why don't we call them records, or let's say it's a record now, that would be more the current, current way to look at it. It's more electronic facing. And records contain, instead of information items, let's call it data or structured data. Structured data can be encapsulated in records. It can extend beyond them. Records are interacted, are exchanged as part of interactions and transactions. Transactions and interactions occur really as services in the modern world. Like, that's how we want to think of them. And services are operated by businesses. And this is where we get a little bit legal up in here, like especially so we can imagine a legal person. It was like what was the appropriate high-level wrapper that Chris used earlier, but like let's just say a legal entity would be how I want to really think about this from a legal perspective. In markets now, we ask, okay, there's two kinds of markets, let's just say for purposes of today. One kind of market is the kind of market that's a legal entity, and the other kind of market isn't. Okay, like let's just say that. And so the kind of market that's a legal entity is New York Stock Exchange, right? Chicago Commodities, The kind of market that isn't is maybe like, what is the market for Beanie Babies, perhaps? That might be, or for socks.
Well, anything over the counter, any over the counter market between two bilateral counterparties.
Yep. Yeah. So it's like it partakes of lots of market. We have like Bureau of Labor Statistics, and other people will talk about like markets, but there's not a boundary condition. There's not a legal entity. It's more like the accumulation of lots of transactions of a certain type that we will call an open kind of market of some kind. I don't really have the language for this. I'm dying to meet Sloan or other person that can say, oh, the words for this are, I don't know the words for it, but I just know from doing this kind of work that there's the kind of market I want to focus on for today is the kind of market that's a legal party. If we do that, then we can say the market is an actor that like we can assign a name to. And we can give them a business name or her, a legal name and a technical name. I think that's delightful. Now we can make real progress because what we can do is we can contain, like put in a box, in a use case, a scenario, in a buildable schematic, a blueprint. We can encapsulate the complexity, a block, and we can now align and harmonize and integrate so much more of the business, legal, and technical dimensions of the interactions that are happening. And we can maybe begin even to start to tune what those market conditions are, to optimize them based on merit order algorithms at a higher level nature than the ones that are maybe composing the price points at this level.
Technically, a lot of markets operate as a central counterparty function, where technically, if you buy and sell on an exchange, that's not an exchange between the person who's selling and the person who's buying. Each of them is doing a deal with the exchange. The exchange is the central counterparty.
Yeah, which is great. So that would be like point blank. So we might even want to maybe model. Every team doesn't have to model one thing. By the way, we could rock out 2 or 3. Modeling that's actually very interesting in terms of creating a bit of a library of like legal primitives of like the basic design patterns. And having like the market be an entity for a transaction is one that I would take off the shelf all day long and slot into these kinds of diagrams. I'm glad you said that.
Dennis, are you familiar with LEIs?
Legal entity identifiers, Brian?
Yes, that's correct.
Could you extrapolate upon this critical identifier of legal entities? Because
we already talked about this. Are you mocking me, or
what I'm saying is I'm trying to set you up in a host of a TV show kind of way because we're broadcasting.
What's your LEI is a favorite client question? I'm not sure. Okay, gotta get that info.
No, I'm not mocking you. Actually,
like
I'm glad that you're saying it because what we're gonna do after a short break is gonna start modeling stuff, and the names of like businesses are gonna come up. And people are going to say stuff like Acme Corporation, but is it the corporation's ID? Is it the tax ID? Like, how do we lock down a unique identifier for these businesses? Is going to be absolutely critical on the especially the technical dimension of the name that we ascribe to the entity that's a business. And so that's been a tangled mess. And because you know more about legal entity identifiers than I do, I was kind of in my hand-handed way asking, could you please describe them?
Cool. Yeah. No, I was going to talk about the whole legal entity identifiers in general, and their importance tomorrow. But I will
maybe like
talk about this part. Yeah. So after the financial meltdown of 2008, I forget which international body was FAFSA.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, that's right.
Which FAFSA stands for Financial
Accounting something board.
Standards board. Yeah.
So they said, look, one of the problems here is that no one knows who's dealing with whom, and we can't unpack where all these things are going. And part of that is, there was no standard way to refer to these entities. So they set up this system of legal entity identifiers in which different organizations can become legal entity identifier minters. So they sort of becoming a notary. You have the ability to mint new LEIs, which are 20-digit identifiers, and they, you know, essentially are like, you know, a DUNS numbers or something, but they're public. They're self-registering, and they're increasingly being required to use in transactions. So in the new MiFID II regulations that just came out that underlie various kinds of transactions require that every party in a MiFID II compliant transaction has to have an LEI. So that sort of thing encourages then everyone to get an LEI and use it. Now, there are also, well, there are people who are making LEIs more sort of web friendly, so they're making them web dereferenceable. So if you want to know,
I didn't know that.
yeah, so people like there's an organization that's doing that, that's turning LEIs into URLs, and so you dereference the URL and you get information about who's behind it. Thomson Reuters also has a system of identifiers called PermID, and there's a site called permid.org, and we provide more information about more organizations because you don't have to register for your own LEI. Sometimes we will just assign one to you. We make that system of identifiers public. We provide 3.5 million organizations and their permid.org information free of charge for anyone who wants it in both tabular and linked data format. And in addition to
This is incredibly good.
the LEI people provide, we provide links to officers and directors of companies, industry codes, so more stuff than you get from LEI for more companies. Just saying.
Yeah.
But,
That's like bucket loads of solution.
and then you can also, and then we link to LEIs within the data. So if you know a company's LEI, you can look it up on Thomson Reuters through its LEI and get the PermID record. Or if you just want to look things up by name, you look it up, it will tell you the LEI.
Is that open? Is that part of your subscription services?
That is all free.
Really?
I didn't know that.
Could you share the link? That's awesome. Because sometimes all I have is a tax ID number,
Yeah.
and we don't know if they have an LEI.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool to PermID, not just for your
And then,
hairdresser.
is it? Do you roll the SAIC codes into that?
Yes.
Okay.
PERM.ID, right? Or is it?
PERMID.
Permit. Oh,
Permit.
PermID.org. Oh. Yes.
Yeah, we're in order.
So you know what might be cool well, let's see what we come up with when we do a little bit of modeling today and kind of learn how to do it and calibrate. But maybe we can, I'm never happy until we click the button and something happens and stuff. So like maybe one of the things we could look at for one or two of the teams that come up with something where like being able to check the idea of a business is useful, is we can get a token and hook it up to the PermID service.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want me to give you my update about the Block One wallet?
Oh yeah. Let's just get the update on the wallet, and then we'll wrap the segment. Well, there's going to be a Chipotle run and a few other things out there for food, and then we'll come back and do a little bit of modeling. So what's the update on the wallet?
Okay, so if you look at your wallet, I think that just the wallet. Yeah. Oh, do you want to open your wallet?
I do. It sounds. It's a big ask, but okay. It goes.
Hopefully the cat transaction flows.
Here. Is it here? I heard it go. No. Oh, I think I timed out. Did I time out? Okay, so log back in.
For Stronghold, for those wallets, do you guys provide any type of, guarantee?
We put, so we give you, the code, that sequence to regenerate your wallet if you've lost your password.
Yep.
But if you've lost both of those,
Yeah, the single key, single factor, yeah, that's.
it's like that quote from The Importance of Being Earnest. To lose one parent is unfortunate,
Yes.
but to lose both is just being careless.
And again, that was when I talked to people about why Ripple Gateway. One of the main things that kept coming up, that if, and the people who do set them up, they treat that key like it's, like the trade secret that like Cokes are up. It's, they under lock and key, multiple safes, the 5-factor identification to get to the key, on their part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and so someone I was interacting with was, pointed out that if these Ethereum coins that we were getting today for free were, you could cash them in, they were worth like 800. They were worth like $800 when we got them.
Yeah.
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 Can I confirm for?
Well, I mean, and that's the thing, without any market controls on these exchanges, it's volatility is the game.
Okay, so
What do we do?
Go to view all transactions.
Do you want to
And
know
you
the
provide the
guys
ability
that-
to buy in, do you guys do a paper service?
I want to broadcast this screen. Are we doing that?
Block one screen?
Yep. Are we doing it or not?
It's on the video for
If you
you.
actually purchase
I think you would need to change it. You have to.
already have them, and then have.
Okay. Thank you. You were very handy, Mila. Thank you. Okay. And so we click on, does anyone remember what he told me to do?
Yeah, view all transactions.
Oh, darn it. Okay. No problem. I'm sorry that we timed out.
No problem.
You two should meet. Can you exchange information, please? Okay. So what do I do, Brian?
View all transactions.
The page is that. Thanks.
Computer immersion.
Okay, so now if you, hover over confirmed here. So you'll see that you get the block number.
Yep.
And the number of block confirmations. So that's the number of blocks that you are away from the head block. So things turn confirmed, it seems, when they're somewhere between, I'm not sure, 10 and 20 confirmations.
Yep.
In.
Yep.
Okay, so then unhover over that. So then now you've got this other transaction that is, so it's not, it must not be 10. So you've got this other transaction that's unconfirmed. So you've got a block number here and it's got 12 confirmations.
Yeah.
So it must be, I think, then 20 confirmations that are required for this to turn from unconfirmed to confirmed.
Does everyone know what that means? So by 20 confirmations, you need to confirm the consensus algorithm, right?
Yeah.
Is what he's getting at. So the consensus algorithm here is maybe 20 agreed consistent confirmations, and then go and then confirmed, and at that point it would become perhaps, like we say in the contract, it is legally enforceable upon, or we'd have some like event precedent or something like that.
So it's not yet valid.
Well, it's valid. It's on the blockchain, but it's not. So it hasn't been agreed to enough times for this status. But this status is sort of outside of the blockchain protocol. It's on the chain. This is just, sort of artificial status within this wallet.
But does it change the legal status of?
Well, that's a good question.
It's like when a credit card transaction was in-house, and it takes a certain amount of time before that's converted. This is the same process, except you're going through basically like how close it is.
So we're seeing like a pending charge.
And the one thing I've used is all about inputs and outputs and inputs. And allowing it to cycle.
Hey, come on up.
Data to cycle.
Mr. Poppers, show it.
Okay.
Do
you have a card or do you?
So I think part of, one of the interesting things is that, the speed at which things progress on this chain depends on the number of people.
How do I see the counterparty?
I send money to
How do I see the thing?
Brown on Telegram, and basically the entire time we've been sitting here.
Business way.
That's like 2 blocks.
Yeah.
So there's just not that much activity. Well, because this is based in Switzerland also, this particular chain, so I think it probably has, you might be the only people who are doing things.
Yeah. It's there,
So how do these people
based on the number of people who are
Selling ads for
in the network.
it's just an ad, yeah. It's like it comes down to directed advertising.
We gotta do testnet.
confirm the transaction was.
Yeah, no,
Do
it's,
testnet.
that seems like a good idea.
Oh, here we go.
Yes, sir. Is that what makes it legally
I
enforceable?
literally.
Right, is it very appropriately, that's the good question.
Because you're using the
Oh,
word
but
testnet,
I think
so I don't know.
What we can draw from it for
I
the
mean-
scope of this class, and I think to some extent I'm just going to, like
Yeah.
Bob Shikai, some like the identity, really, heavyweight experts that you have at Thomson Reuters.
Yeah, 'cause this
I-
is,
what I got
okay,
from that
North
for
Fork?
this- For this
So why
kind of
did that
app
not
is
confirm?
that they've
Why didn't
created
that go to the
intelligently
confirmation?
capability within a wallet where you can compose a network transaction or some network, and you can begin to set the rules that are appropriate to your network. And then you could, one of the rules you could set is, no, it's 50 transactions, not 20, or it's like 2, not 20, so
Oh,
it's
maybe it's because
faster.
he's on the wrong.
But then you
one.
could even say it's legally enforceable when. Or if you had a sophisticated
Yes,
network
that's
or
the
rule,
word.
I might set the usual for
Test.
transactional networks, I think it would be, it's legally enforceable as soon as it enters the, the first ledger or something, but but you don't get the benefit of the dispute resolution and the liability cap and some other stuff until it's been confirmed by 20 out of 50 of the, like core members or stewards of
Get on
nodes
their
of a network or something like that. So you can start to actually like sculpt the legal
I
rules to
expect
support
much
reflective
faster
business
Wi-Fi.
and to use the best of the technical capabilities.
Yeah, and that's kind of reflected in the wallet that, the funds are added and subtracted much quicker than the things are confirmed.
It's in the-
Yeah, that's reflected in the balance that you have in your wallet. It just says, these transactions are not confirmed,
Yes, I could.
they're some degree confirmed towards that threshold.
See, whatever.
It's not that we were able to forensically determine that the blockchain that is on is an internal like Reuters build of the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah.
It's not on like the big public Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah.
So
Well, this is what you're seeing is the issues when you have a intrinsic embedded clearinghouse in the function of the process, not a separate clearinghouse.
So this is when I did the blockchain overview at the eDiscovery Festival or whatever the thing. I showed like sort of like I call it an abstracted version of the functions. Like here's a hash, here's a block, here's a this, here's a that. This is actually this is what it looks like in its mature version. So if you were looking at if you were conducting transactions on Ethereum, the Ethereum public blockchain, and you wanted to look on the ledger to see a transaction for some reason, you're doing accounting or bookkeeping, you just want to know how much did I spend with this person last year for some reason, or did they get a discount this year, who knows what. You can now actually pull up this thing called what's called a explorer. This is a blockchain explorer. And so this is, hey, David.
So, because we were unable to get into the testnet, we're just going to go for one of the transactions that came through on EtherScan, which is Block Explorer. And you can see, that's a lot. It's 64 Ether, 64.437.
It's getting into be some real digits.
Yeah.
And so you can see the transaction cost for all these things and who sent it, who got it. And then you can even sometimes, you can also see the comments, and it's fun because of the nature of Ethereum, the one-way nature. It's a very good idea to go ahead and if there's an address that you are suggested to send your Ether to, it's often a good idea to put it into EtherScan to check it, because sometimes there are comments like, this is a scammer and you shouldn't do that. So
Pretty handy.
that's a good thing.
And so you extrapolate to things like perm ID. and the convergence, I think the far-sighted convergence of blockchain technologies and legal entity identifiers and business registry type identifiers that Thomson Reuters is making available with PermID. It's interesting to imagine ways you could extend that capability by allowing further annotation. But could you go back just to the transaction block?
Yeah.
Like one day, I just went to a semester on a transaction block.
What block height does, is that just because they envision the blockchain like building out vertically instead of horizontally?
Yeah.
That's why they call it
Otherwise, it would
block
be
height.
block width.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So TX hash, this is the, remember how we did hashes? This is the SHA-256, secure hash algorithm 256 bits, message digest result from hashing all the data in this block. It gets you this. So this becomes the checksum for the transaction hash. Excuse me, not the whole block. Here's the receipt status. So we have a status, receipt, success. Block height. Actually, the truth is I'm not exactly sure. I know that the height relates to the up and down versus the Y. Exactly what, I think this is how many transactions are in a block, I think.
Do we want to click on it and see what happens when we click on it?
I just want to keep, I want to just do one talk through it. And partly just look at it's been, I'm a lot more familiar with the Bitcoin block than the Ethereum block. So I'm hardly expert in this, but just looking at it, I think it's worth taking a moment to look. You have a timestamp. And that's UTC, so that's nice. And that's part of what there's consensus on, if I'm not mistaken. You have a from. This is I believe it's a hash of a public key that relates to the user who transmitted or the payor of this in this transaction of this like cryptocurrency. You have a to. This is the payee that the ether was paid to. So if you do, what I realize is like, when I think about this in directory structures or a phone book, I would like go alphanumerically or something like that. In this case, the only way to do is you copy it and you do a regex, you could just do a find for this unique string to get to the address on the blockchain of that party and to look at all the transactions that they've conducted from or to. Bless you. So that's kind of how they literally do that. The value. The nonce is interesting. Do you remember nonces? Sort of, yeah, okay. And input data. So anyway, so that's just like a quick run through a block on this particular blockchain, on this Ethereum blockchain. Bitcoin is a little bit different. And if you structure a blockchain for like defense procurement, or if you structure one that was like gained prominence in like an energy market, I think the block might be different. Like I'll bet you if you did it down to the transaction level, we'd be talking about like how much, what's it, like BTUs or joules or whatever, or you'd have some
kilowatt hours.
Yeah, kilowatt hours.
Kilowatt hours.
Yeah. So like you kind of like structure the transaction.
But if you really want to get fancy, everything energy can be reduced to joules. So
yeah, I thought it was joules.
And BTUs. So.
And you structure the transaction data around it, and maybe even like what, which like whatever option under the master contract they operate under, who knows what. You do it, so you can get the automagic like logging onto onto a ledger that reflects and can also assist in metering or triggering legal events or other types of notices and things, the whole deal. So this is very composable. This isn't like what the blockchain, from the tablets coming down from the mountain said it has to be. Like this is very much something that we can structure to support and reflect the business that we're doing. Okay. So any questions on any of those rudiments? So we heard about computational contracts. We saw the light about merit order processing that basically effectuates our contract in a way that is computational. Thank you. And then we heard about how to do, and we learned a bit about how to do a use case, and how to, we didn't go too deep, but how to do a swim lane diagram. We'll pick that up tomorrow when we get back. And then we saw a little bit about how to just can think about in a system, like what's like the market or the trick, like the big level thing. What are the businesses? What are the transactions or interactions, what are the documents, and what are the records, let's say, and what's the data running inside it. So by the way, this is a record. This is data. The blockchain, I also call a record. It's a superset record of all the blocks, and then an individual block and individual transaction are also records that are nested. This is data. And the businesses here would be whatever the from and the to are. So they may be individuals in this business climate. And then the marketplace would be, it's not Etherscan because that's an explorer, but it would be Ethereum public blockchain would be the rough equivalent. If you had to assign like a role in the stack, everything, I'd say that's the market within which businesses or like legal parties that are businesses and or individuals. Well, that's
Or is that the
another
network?
question.
Is it the network though?
The network that Ethereum runs on?
Yeah, is Ethereum the network and our marketplace is built on the network?
Yeah, so that we should pick, so that's the question. So you would, I think a good way to legally hack this or to legally engineer this would be to answer that question. And so like Chris said, it would be the network upon which the blockchain operates.
Because Ethereum would say we're just a nested ledger.
So yeah,
Just a nested distributed ledger.
This transaction could be someone from an exchange transferring something, or it could be something between two parties.
Yep, like in our case, it was two individual
But
parties.
if it was an exchange, then that wouldn't show because that would be the clearing would be inside of the exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what we can do, and again, I hasten to add the 7 layers I showed you are a conceptual way to think of it. In reality, it's like probably like it's like 3, 4, 5 layers or something. Things are collapsed, or in like really dizzying complex ones, it could be like 10 layers. Because for certain engineering or other reasons, you want to actually get, like in the credit card networks, it's actually incredible when I did a payment thing, the complexity that everyone slots in there. And like they know their role, they know their lane, they know their inputs and outputs, but these things can get more or less complex. But I think what we can do is now we can start playing with some good example scenarios and see if we can use some engineering approaches to structure transactions in ways that are buildable, and we can test them against success metrics like business success metrics, legal success metrics. Do we get predictable legal results? And technical success metrics, performance or interoperability, that kind of thing. We can sort of see the flow. That's a fun time. So I see that we're at 4:40, and that people very nice. They have it like slumped over, or they're not no one's under the table yet. That's good. You excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Poppers. So what I'd like to do is kind of like wind this down. Where are we? Here we go. I want to thank everybody out in the internet land and say that we'll be back online tomorrow at like 2 o'clock Eastern time. I think is when we should plan to get back online for purposes of public consumption. But until then, track Telegram if you want to play along with what we do between now and 2 o'clock tomorrow. And look forward to seeing you then.